We're live. All right, y'all. Well, I'm about to kick things off here for my week of building in public. Really excited to dive in together. First things first, I'm going to get a couple of emails and stuff out. Give me just a second here while I get these messages sent, and then I'm going to go ahead and post this link in the on LinkedIn and whatnot so that folks can join us. Looks like a couple people are already popping on. Hey there, how's it going? Pop in the chat, let me know who's with us here today. Let me grab my link here. I created some Asana tasks for myself, so I will remember all of the things I need to do and places I need to post and share. So let me pop over to LinkedIn. And all right. Okay, I have posted successfully in on LinkedIn, and I'm gonna go over here. I gotta post in tofu for all my tofu folks. Uh, okay, posting there. Hey y'all, I see a couple folks joining on the live stream here. Pop in the chat, just let me know who's with me here as we kick things off. I'm just going through my list here, making sure I post everything wherever I need to post it, as I have promised that I will post the link and whatnot as I go live. So I'm just getting all that done, and then we'll dive into it. Okay, I think I've got all of my posts out. Let me go check my tasks here. Okay, yeah, I think I'm all set. Gonna go ahead and close up Asana and let's get into it. Once again, hello everyone who's on the stream. Thanks for joining me this morning. I'm really excited to kick off today's project, or I should say this week's project, and specifically diving into today's workflow. So let me just pull up my agenda here really quick, and we'll talk through what we're going to do today. Move to person one. All right, so I am going to go ahead and present my screen. Cool. All right, so yeah, let's get this thing underway. Just as a quick recap, if you're joining and maybe you haven't followed along or you haven't seen my original announcement post, this week I'm going to be live streaming every day. Every day we're going to be tackling sort of a different part of the content marketing strategy process. And essentially, what we're going to be doing together is building a content marketing strategy from scratch. So, we're going to start with sort of some information about our customers and our ICP. We're going to go through, do a bunch of research. We're going to do a bunch of brainstorming. And throughout the week, what I'll be doing is sharing my process. I'll be kind of talking through the thinking and the strategy live as I go through it. So I'm really here. I'm really working. There might be moments where I'm sort of deep in thought, but I will try my best to keep up the engagement with anybody who's joining me live. I will be checking in on the chat and stuff to answer questions, that kind of thing. So if you do have questions or you want to talk through anything that I'm working on or working through, go ahead and post that in the chat, and I will do my best to share thoughts, feedback, insight about our process, my process, and how I'm going through it. I am also going to be sharing some free resources this week. I don't even think I mentioned that in my post, but we've got a couple of templates and things that we're going to be using throughout this week. So I'm going to go ahead and share those as well. I will follow up each stream with kind of a recap post on LinkedIn. And in that post, you can comment on the post if you'd like to get access to the template that we worked with that on that particular day. So we'll get into that in just a moment here. First of all, let me just check my chat real quick. Hey, it looks like Belinda's joining us. Hey, Belinda. Yeah, let me go through kind of the full week's agenda, and then we'll zoom in here on Monday and kind of go through what we're going to be covering today. So today, Monday, we're focused on customer and persona research. So I've done sort of some pre-work, if you will, a number of interviews and discussions I've been having with content and marketing folks who are sort of potential buyers for Optimist. That's maybe a good place to start is just to frame this. The content marketing strategy that we're building this week is for Optimist, the content marketing agency that I run. If you're not familiar with it, we're sort of in the process of doing some repositioning and updating our value propositions and our messaging and that kind of thing. And so as part of that, we're also updating our own content marketing strategy, trying to rethink, how do we get in front of our ideal customers? So that's why we're building this in public. So today we're going to go through the preliminary work that I did. We're going to review the transcripts and the interviews and all of that good content. And then we're going to work on filling out sort of a buyer persona matrix. And so what that's going to do is going to help us really like unpack the buyer personas, get into their minds a little bit, understand some of the problems and challenges that they're facing. The main framework that I use is called roles, goals, and worries. We'll talk more about that today, but basically it's sort of a simple way of breaking down a persona and sort of defining some of the key drivers that go into a potential buying decision. At the end of the process today, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take our findings from those interviews. We're going to compare that to sort of a SWOT analysis of Optimist and kind of what we're good at, where we are sort of best suited to help clients. And then we're ultimately going to select one of those ICPs as our focus moving forward. So the whole content strategy that we build will be focused on reaching this specific ICP that we decide today on this stream. Tomorrow, Tuesday, day two. Day two, we'll take the ICP that we identified today, and we're going to go, sort of one level deeper. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we'll review the transcripts and the interviews. Again, we'll look for information about specific channels that these folks use. So we gathered a lot of insight about how they get information, how they learn, different specific creators that they follow, all kinds of things like that. So we'll be digging into that piece of it. We'll be looking at additional profiles who match that ICP. So we'll do a bit of internet sleuthing, find some other folks who kind of fit that bill, and then we will look at their social activity and that kind of thing, and dig into some research there to kind of identify again, like, what are the channels these people generally use to learn about things like content marketing and SEO. Who are the specific creators that they follow, and what is the type of content that is most popular with those creators. So we'll get into this framework a little more tomorrow, but channels, creators, content. That's basically what we're trying to unpack on Tuesday. And that's going to give us a lot of insight about, okay, if we're trying to reach these same people based on the content that they consume and engage with online, what should we be doing from our content strategy perspective to meet them where they are and create content that is going to get their attention. Wednesday, we're going to start getting into the actual strategy component of it. So we sort of laid the framework, the groundwork here. We've got some information about who we're trying to reach. We've got some insight about how we might reach them and what kind of content they might consume. Now we're going to sort of come at it from the other side. And we're going to think about our business. Okay, so from a strategy perspective, there are a number of things we need to define. But Wednesday, we're going to be focused on sort of three primary factors here. One is the problem that we're ultimately trying to help someone solve, or the problem that we're trying to solve, I should say, from a strategy perspective. We're going to talk about the goals that we set for each strategy, or I'm sorry, each channel, and the different stages of the funnel. we have a content strategy canvas where we'll sort of map everything out. So we'll say, okay, hey, we're trying to reach this ICP via YouTube at the top of the funnel. And based on that, we need to have this type of strategy, and here are the goals, for instance. So we'll unpack all of that on Wednesday. But this is where we're going to really get into the meat of like mapping out a strategy and really digging into what a strategy actually means. I think a lot of people, confuse either tactics for a strategy or they think a strategy is just sort of documenting things like your ICP and whatnot. Those are all important. Don't get me wrong. But I think the missing component here, the missing link for a lot of folks is just sort of the high level understanding of what are we trying to do and how are we trying to do it. And so that's what Wednesday is going to be focused on, is really defining that high level strategy, what you might call like the problem to be solved and the guiding principle, so that way we can then define some of the specific tactics that kind of roll up into that strategy. So that's going to be Wednesday. Thursday, we'll start to get more tactical. So now, once we've sort of defined, hey, at the top of the funnel, we want to reach folks, in this particular way. We're trying to communicate these specific types of messages. And here's kind of what the strategy looks like at the highest level. Now we can say, okay, how do we actually execute on that on a day-to-day tactical basis? So in that case, we'll talk about channels, we'll talk about metrics, and we'll talk about tactics. So we're going to be, mapping specific channels to each function and each stage of the journey. We're going to be defining the metrics associated with those and then developing specific tactics. Friday is where we're going to take that all one step further and really get into the meat of, okay, if we've got these goals, these channels, these strategies, and these tactics, then, what does that actually look like? What are some ideas about some specific content we might create? We might dig into even like some keyword research or some content research and really develop some specific content plans that we can execute moving forward. So Fridays where we'll kind of tie all of this together and really say, okay, based on all of this preliminary work, here's where we've gotten to. Here are some specific content ideas that we can actually create that align with all of this work that we've done to really map the entire process. So that's the workflow for the week. Let me quickly pop over here and just check in on chat. Thanks, y'all. I love loving the comments here. Thanks for joining me, Belinda, Dipti, Valerie, Sunil, Natasha. Hey, how's it going, Natasha? Good to see you here. Yeah, thanks y'all for joining me. Also excited. So let's circle back here. Let's talk about Monday, which is today. As I said before, we're going to focus on customer persona research. We are going to review our customer research interviews. We're going to be looking for some key takeaways and insights. And then we're going to start to sort of parse that out into this framework that, again, I call roles, goals, and worries, which will help us understand things like the primary needs, pain points, jobs to be done. And then from there, we're going to, we're essentially going to fill that information into our buyer persona worksheet. So before we get into that, actually, let me go ahead. I'm going to switch my screen share here. Let me show you some of the resources that I'm going to be sharing this week and that we'll be using. Let me start with actually here, let me open these up. I've got a couple different tabs here going. All right. So this is the template that we'll be using today. So the buyer persona template, this is, again, just a structured kind of way for us to go through our thinking. We'll be unpacking these interviews and the transcripts and the bullet points from the conversations that we've had, and sort of filling in the specific details here. So we'll identify, we'll give sort of each buyer persona a name. We'll give it some detail. We'll talk about the role that person plays. We'll talk about some of the goals that they may have, and we'll talk about worries. One thing I'll note here before we dive into that is, I personally have sort of my own philosophy on buyer personas. I personally think most buyer personas suck. And the reason why I think that is because I think that, the idea that you need to have like this super demographic heavy persona, where, this is a woman in her mid 30s and she's got 2 kids and, whatever her household income is this, that could be valuable in some contexts, but in my experience, especially in sort of the B2B space, a lot of stuff is like irrelevant. And I think it can be frankly distracting and misleading because people tend to focus heavily on sort of these like personal and demographic details, and they miss the specifics of like how your product or service or business helps this person in their job and actually doing something that they're trying to accomplish from a professional or sometimes personal perspective. And so that's why I like this framework, because it sort of simplifies and it sort of forces you to think a little, in my opinion, a little bit more deeply. So rather than just sort of sketching a caricature of a person, it's thinking more deeply about what is their actual role. How do they fit into the organization? How do their goals affect the business, and how do they affect them personally? And then what are some of the things that just like keep them up at night? I think that's that's where we can really start to unpack those like specific pain points and things that make for compelling content, compelling messaging, compelling marketing in general. So that's a real quick preview of my my personal philosophy on personas. So I'll be sharing this template, as I said previously. I'm going to post on LinkedIn once we wrap up today with sort of the final outcome from today's call, and then we will or today's live stream, and then I'll share. You'll be able to get a copy of this persona template if that would be helpful for you. The next thing that we're going to be using is this channel research. Let me flip my thing here. Is a channel research template. So as you can see, the template itself is very similar to the one that we've already used. But basically, what it includes is, we're going to go sort of channel by channel. So based on the conversations that we've had, we have a pretty good idea of what channels these different personas are using to get information, learn about content, stay up to date on SEO, all of those types of things. And so what we're going to do is kind of go channel by channel, unpack details about that channel, and then we're going to dig into the creators and the content. So as I said, the framework here is channel, creators, content. So we want to start with what are the channels people, our ICP is using, who are some of the specific creators that they may follow or interact with on those channels, and then what is the content that those creators are creating, and what does it look like? What, not necessarily the specific topics, but the format, the structure, the cadence, those types of things are going to help us set the tone for our own content strategy and sort of mirror some of those things that are already working and seem to resonate with our audience. So that's going to be tomorrow, I believe, in our schedule. We'll get into this template here. And then the final template that I'll be sharing is what I call the content strategy canvas. So this is a pretty big document, and so we're going to spend a lot of time in here. I think we're actually going to be in here all three of the final days. And so let me just walk you through this really quick. And you'll be able to get a copy of this throughout the week. As I share my updates, I'll give everyone an opportunity to get their own copy of this template. So a couple things that we're doing here. So one is we have this sort of mapped out by function. So this is really meant to mirror, how most organizations do content marketing, right? Which is that content marketing is rarely sort of its own isolated team. Generally, it's supporting a bunch of other teams, right? So the folks who are creating content are often creating content that support brand or demand gen or lead gen. Sometimes SEO is its own function. And so we're going to start by mapping out the function here. In our case, Optimist has an agency, right? We don't really have all of these individual teams. I am basically all of these teams, right? We are all of these teams. But nevertheless, I think it's helpful to think about this in terms of these different functions, because each of these functions generally have their own goals. And so we want to think about, okay, how do we, what is the goal of brand at, the sort of pre-funnel or the affinity stage? What is the goal of brand at the top of the funnel stage, et cetera? And then from there, we can really get more detailed into, setting specific channels, metrics, tactics, et cetera. So this strategy canvas, as I said, we sort of map it out by function here, and then you'll notice that there are tabs along the bottom here for basically each stage in the funnel. So what we're trying to do is sort of get like a 4D a 4D strategy, if you will, or I guess really it's 3D, but we're looking at these different functions, breaking down the goals, and then also looking at those as it relates to the funnel. So as we move through the funnel, how do the goals of demand gen or lead gen or SEO change? And then how does our content strategy need to align with those changing goals so that we are A, serving all of these functions, and B, meeting the buyer at each stage in the funnel based on the different channels where we're reaching them. So this is going to be, again, as I said, I believe we picked this template up on Wednesday, and we'll basically be working in this template for the rest of the week. So those are the templates we're going to be going through this week. And with all that said, let me go ahead and flip back here. So we are going to be focused on buyer personas today. Let me pull up a couple of my research documents here. First of all, let me just do a quick pass because I want to make sure we've sort of scrubbed all of the personal data out of them. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay. All right. Sorry, I just gotta make sure that we got all of this sort of cleared out here. Do, 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 do. Yeah, I think we're all good. I've gone through this before, but I just want to make sure that I'm not exposing anyone's personal data from these interviews. Final thing here. Okay, yeah, I think we're all set. So let me just share some things that we have gone through. Okay, so the process here basically a couple fold. So number one, as I said before, the first thing that we did in preparation for this week is we talked to a lot of people. So I've interviewed something like 30 folks who I think sort of represent a couple different buyer personas or potential buyer personas for an agency like Optimist. And we'll get into kind of segmenting these different personas in a bit. But the main thing that we did here was we sort of interviewed these folks. We tried to understand a little bit about kind of what their roles, goals, and worries, right? So using that same framework, the questions that we walked through with these folks really focused on what is their role inside the organization, how does it sort of fit into the overall team, the company, the business structure, and then what are sort of the specific day-to-day activities? What are they doing on a day-to-day basis, and how does that sort of relate to specific goals? So sometimes goals are metric and like KPI driven, right? So a lot of folks, for instance, told us, "Hey, my main goal is organic traffic, or my main goal is publish 20 blogs a month, or whatever it is," right? So sometimes it's a quantitative goal. Other times it's really a qualitative goal. So when we think about goals, it's not always just like whatever OKR your boss sets. A lot of times it's a bigger, like sort of more ambitious vision that this person might have for their team, their business, their career. So thinking about those goals and again, how we can kind of support those ambitions, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, is going to play a role here. And then the final thing is, worries or challenges or pain points, right? So what are these people dealing with on a day-to-day basis? What are some of the challenges that they're facing? What are some of the barriers that are stopping them from being able to achieve those goals? And so that's where we really dig into it. In terms of the process here, it's pretty straightforward. Hosted these calls, private, Google Meets calls. As you can see here, we've got all of the interview transcripts here. The transcripts are helpful, but of course they don't. It's a lot of information to take on. The transcription is not always great, etc. So we did use AI to kind of summarize and abbreviate some of these interviews and help us understand some of the context. So for the purposes of our research here today, or our process today, what we're going to be doing is focusing mostly on these bullet points. And so as you can see here, we've got kind of everything set up and uh, marked out. So we have each of the interviews. There's a sort of a similar structure where we go through some of the key highlights and topics that the person shared with us about their role, their job, their process, etc. And then what we also do with the AI is we asked it to focus specifically on these roles, goals, and worries. So zooming in on things that sort of clarified what this person's position is, what their responsibilities are, what goals they have for themselves or for their team, and then some of the barriers, some of the worries that are blocking them. So what we'll be doing today is kind of going through these and really analyzing them at length. This is, by the way, about half of the interviews that I have transcripts for. So we have a whole nother set that we'll be going through as well. But basically, what we'll be doing is identifying patterns and trends that we can use in our own insights. So, real quick, let me pull up my, let me do kind of a quick side by side here. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work with. Okay, so you can only see half. Let me try resharing my screen here. I might just need to share kind of my whole, yeah, my whole screen probably. Yeah, okay, let me just do that. Let me share my screen, my whole window. Boop, infinity. Okay, so here's what I'm looking at. Okay, so I've got basically the two sheets that we're working on. One is the interview bullets from our first set of interviews, and then over here we've got the buyer persona template. So let's kick things off. Let's get into it. The first thing that I'll share here is that we have already kind of segmented these into two distinct groups. So we're going to be covering kind of two different buyer personas for today's stream. So the first one I'm going to call like mid-market content leader. Okay, so from the interviews that we conducted, a couple criteria that this person fits into. One is that they generally have a title of something like head of content, content director, content marketing manager, and then sometimes they also have an ancillary title, right? So maybe they're not directly in a content role, but they're head of demand gen or something along those lines that tends to be very content focused, and content is a big part of their overall sort of mandate or their function. And so what we found here is that these folks also tend to be sort of mid-sized companies, which I would classify as about 500 to 5,000 employees. That's a broad range, but the point being is that these folks in these particular roles that we interviewed here, they are sort of past the startup stage, right? They're not like an early stage. They're not like a small local business or anything like that. They have they're sort of that mid market where they've got a pretty established business. They're probably doing millions of dollars in revenue, if not more, and they also often have sort of a fairly sophisticated or at least established marketing and content function. So that's sort of the bucket that this first set of interviews fits into. And so with that, we'll kind of go through these together and talk about each of these different personas or each of these different interviews. And what we're going to be thinking about today, as I said before, is we're going to be thinking about the roles, goals, and worries. And from that, we can start to generate some content ideas. This is just some sort of free play space that I like to have in the sheet in case, anything pops into my mind as I'm thinking through this or as I'm working through it. And I want to get into or get that idea kind of down on paper. So let's focus in on the roles. So first of all, I'm just going to jump right into the bullet points that we generated here. So let's talk about this first person that we interviewed. their role, they are a content marketing leader. As you can see up here, their actual title is head of content for two different companies in sort of the ad tech and community tech space, with roughly 1,000 to 5,000 employees. So as we just talked about, kind of fits clearly into this bucket. So this person is a content marketing leader. They're previously a journalist. Now their role is basically managing the entire content department, working closely with the growth team. Cross-functional collaboration is a big part of their role as well. So working extensively with PR, brand campaigns, growth, SEO, product marketers, and external agencies to create and manage content. They're also in charge of strategic implementation. Okay, so developing content strategies, managing the website lifecycle, and sort of the foundational SEO and content creation efforts. So let's sort of cut through the AI generated jargon here, and let's start to catalog some of this. So the way that I go through this process is I'm just going to kind of throw bullet points into this sheet, and then if anything sort of contradicts stuff, I might delete it later if we see that the bullet points for the other interviews kind of corroborate previous points. That's sort of a vote, like an upvote, if you will, for that idea. So it's going to be fluid. We'll sort of throw bullet points as they come, and then we'll kind of analyze them. We'll kind of zoom out and analyze everything as a big picture towards the end. So the first thing I'll note here, right, is that they lead all content efforts. That's probably straightforward, probably self-evident from a title like head of content, but you'd be surprised. And they manage the entire, lead all content efforts, manage team of in-house plus external content, creators or content, the people actually doing sort of the day-to-day content work. This next point I think is really fascinating, and we're going to cover this more because I know this is definitely going to be a theme throughout this research, is that their role is highly cross-functional, right? So the way that I would sort of describe this is that they're kind of like air traffic controllers, right? So this role, what we found from these interviews was people in this role are getting sort of requests or request is probably the best way to put it, for content all the time from all kinds of different organizations, and with sort of various levels of specificity, strategy, any of that, right? But the point being is that a big part of their job is just sort of taking in all of these requests and figuring out what to do with them. Whether that's, yes, we're going to create this, no, we're not going to create this, or hey, we need to rethink this, we need to realign this. This doesn't really work with the strategy, or in some cases it's, hey, you're trying to do this and another team is trying to do something very similar. Can we combine these efforts? So really playing that like strategic cross-functional like integrator role, right? So I would say like collecting, planning and integrating content requests from, again, a broad range of departments, but, PR, brand, growth, SEO, all of these sort of internal teams tend to kind of feed into this role. And then it's their job to sort of figure out, where do I put these resources? How do we get all of this done? Or where can I push back? Those types of more strategic and planning types of decisions. So that's a key component here, is sort of playing that air traffic controller job. I mentioned this before, but I think it's worth noting that the other piece of this, right, is like sort of resource management and strategic alignment, right? So again, maybe you've got your PR team who's coming in and they want a press release about this thing and a blog post about it. And then brand comes in and they're also trying to get, a blog post about this particular topic. And so I think a big part of this role on a day-to-day basis is sort of connecting those dots and saying like, hey, PR, you're working on this, brand, you're working on this. Let's, sort of combine forces. Maybe we can create one blog post instead of two, or maybe we can repurpose the blog post we created for PR to work for the brand. So sort of having that like strategic alignment or like integration component. And I think this is especially true with respect to the repurposing part of it, right? So I think we all know anybody who's on this call who does content for a living of some type, right? Repurposing is has been sort of the drumbeat for many years, right? And many of these teams, right, they know that, hey, we can't create 1,000 new assets every week, but can we take our content? Can we be more thoughtful and strategic about repurposing it, repackaging it, remixing it to meet all of these content needs without starting from scratch every single time? And so I think a big part of this is also that repurposing vision and workflows. So sort of managing that process and being able to say like, hey, we already have a piece of content on this. Here's how we can repurpose it. Here's how we can make it work for these other functions or these other stakeholders who need their own version of this content. So that's another big part of this is that like repurposing, and we'll get into this. Obviously, we're still only on the first interview, so we'll dive more into that as we go through these. The final thing I'll note here is there is sort of an element of support here. Kind of for better or worse. One of the pieces of feedback or one of the data points that we heard a lot was that the folks in this role, kind of feel like order takers, in some cases, right? So they are sort of playing support to all of these other roles. And sometimes they don't always get a strategic, a seat at the table, if you will, as sort of a strategic partner. And so I don't, we'll talk about how that plays into some of the goals and the worries later on. But I think that's not an ideal situation, but I think it is a realistic situation for many of these folks. So I think it's worth documenting it as sort of part of their role, is that they tend to play a support function to other internal teams. And not always given sort of a input on the strategic level. So, one of the things that I heard that we heard from these folks during these interviews was, things like, hey, I get these requests for content from, the brand team or whoever, and the content they're asking for doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't really support their the goals that they say they're trying to achieve, and that's because the people who are sort of putting these requests together, or sort of you can think of it in terms of like a brief, probably that's being created. They're not content folks a lot of times, and they're not even necessarily like strategy people, and so they're maybe just not thinking about it through that lens. And so yeah, they often feel like they're sort of excluded from those conversations. That's definitely one of the main takeaways there. Let's talk about the goals here, but before I do that, let me just flip over here to my StreamYard. Whoop. Repurposing, two of my favorite things. Oh, Sargi's saying that the CMO. Can we change the video? Oh, Sedant, thanks for letting me know. Sorry about the infinity pool here. That's one of the drawbacks here of sort of doing the screen share. I've only got one screen going at the moment. I don't know if I can change the resolution. Can you let me know? Like, are you not able to read what's on the screen, or what's sort of what are you seeing? Let me know what you're seeing there, and we'll try to address it if possible. Okay, so getting into goals, I'll check back in the chat in just a moment. But let's talk a little bit about goals here. All right, so some of the bullet points that AI pulled out from this conversation. So definitely focused on SEO and growth. So this particular person, was saying that a big part of their mandate was focused on SEO. So growing organic traffic in particular, and then sort of supporting growth functions more broadly. They were focused on sort of building like this content foundation. I think this is a big one as well, that we'll probably hear throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and document that in here. I think like foundational content. I think that was the thing that from what I heard from a lot of folks, like they felt like they were on such a treadmill of like creating consistent content on sort of an ad hoc basis, that the business itself was sort of lacking that foundational strategic content. So, even just like a basic blog or like an SEO library or something, that, maybe it's not something that you're creating forever, but something that you are building and maintaining over time. And a lot of these folks, I think what they expressed to me was that they were so busy doing all these other things that they didn't really have the bandwidth or the resources to build out some of this just like basic like content 101 stuff that we should have as a business. So I think that's a big goal, is like, getting bandwidth and resources to create foundational content. And then I know some folks were talking in the chat about, that idea of like repurposing and optimizing content. I think that kind of plays into this, is that, once you have sort of that pool of like foundational content, in theory, at least, that makes it much easier to, kind of repurpose that content to say, okay, how do we use this existing content to support these new requests or these new goals that are cropping up across the team. So getting that bandwidth and those resources to create that foundational content, I think, is another big part of it. And then effective content creation, which is again super generic. Thanks a lot, AI. But essentially, what they're describing here is the part of the conversation where we talked about, it's not just about, unfortunately, for better or worse, it's not just about creating content. It's about, we only have so much budget, we only have so much time. How do we make this sort of as streamlined as possible? So I think another big goal here for these folks is sort of like optimizing content workflow. And again, going back to the idea of like repurposing, like sort of minimizing content that's being created from scratch. So I think, I think that the perception that I got from these conversations was that a lot of, the idea of sort of creating something from scratch is almost like a very big red flag, right? Like if we have to go back to the drawing board and create something and we don't have anything to sort of reference, then that means like either we're lacking sort of this foundational content that would help us accelerate that, or it's not well aligned with our other goals and our other strategies. So I think that was a big sort of through line here, was, minimizing the number of pieces or the number of assets that we're creating, truly from scratch, without, sort of pulling from some kind of an existing piece or existing resource. I think, this last bullet point, I'm actually going to ignore. I'll touch on it really quickly, but basically, this was sort of at the end of the conversation. This person was a former head of content at 2 companies and has since sort of moved on to a different path in the last few months. And their path now is, they're focusing more on like consulting and some other things. And so, they were mentioning how they're kind of focused on helping others like develop their career and stuff. Awesome initiative there, and awesome mission, but not really relevant to their role as a head of content. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that particular bullet point. Worries. Yeah. So this person, let's see. So they talked about content marketing relevance. Yeah, they actually sort of predicted, I think, what I would call like sort of the dissolution of content marketing as like its own function. Essentially is sort of what they described, is that they, looking at the way that their teams have been structured in the past, and looking at how sort of content is so cross-functional, their part of their worry, or really was a prediction, I would say, more than a worry. I don't think that this particular person was super concerned about this. But I think what they were thinking was essentially that content itself might become more of like an integrated piece of many teams, rather than sort of a centralized team that is sort of cross-functional. So that was sort of an interesting takeaway. One of their big worries from their actual experience in this particular case is that the agencies in particular did not do a great job of like sort of understanding their actual needs. So I think this is a big one, right? So it's like sort of aligning content creation with internal goals and strategy, right? I think that's a big one. I think like another thing here is like sort of the lack of context when outsourcing content creation is another big part of it. Obviously budgets, but budgets are always a worry. I've never talked to anybody who's like, oh yeah, we had infinite budget and we, did whatever we needed and that was never a problem. Balancing cost and quality, I think it is, sort of an evergreen worry that someone's dealing with here. Organizational alignment. This is a really interesting one because I think this sort of cuts two different ways. So one is, and let me go ahead and expand this because I think we're gonna end up with a lot more rows here. Organizational alignment, I think, cuts two ways. One is that there's sort of a lack of alignment across the cross-functional teams, meaning, hey, brand isn't talking to PR. They're both asking me for content, but neither of them realizes, how their work affects one another, or that, a lot of times there's overlap or conflict between the things that they're doing. And so I think aligning cross-functional internal stakeholders is a big one. And then the other piece of that, which is also mentioned in this bullet point, is convincing higher ups about the value of content marketing. This was another thing, that here time and time again, probably come again as no surprise to anyone on who's joining on the stream who works in content. This is sort of another evergreen challenge, but just getting buy-in, right? Getting buy-in and budget for the based on the value of content. And a related challenge there, I think, is sort of measuring or quantifying the value of content. Okay, so I think that's another big one, right? Many content teams are not particularly sophisticated, in my experience, about how they measure things like attribution or revenue or any of that stuff. And for good reason. A lot of that is difficult to measure, depending on sort of what your strategy looks like. So, but because of that, it can make it very difficult to get buy-in at the executive level, especially if your CEO or CMO is primarily like a numbers person, or maybe comes from a background in paid where it's much easier to directly attribute dollars in, dollars out, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that again is sort of a perpetual worry or challenge, is like, hey, how do I like sort of justify my existence as a content leader, and then how do I sort of keep the budget or protect the budget for the projects that we're doing, and make sure that everyone knows that it's valuable and it's not kind of on the chopping block. The final bullet point here is about quality control. I think that's probably worth its own bullet point, but I think maintaining maybe the best way to frame that is like maintaining content quality at scale. I think the main challenge here, the main hurdle for a lot of folks is, hey, it's really easy to write great content if you only have to produce 4 blog posts a month or whatever. But as soon as we're trying to scale this and then also sort of scale it exponentially across multiple functions or teams, as we're sort of supporting all of these different campaigns and things, it becomes exponentially more difficult. And so content quality control makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's our first interview. Now, one thing that I might do here, if we have some more time, is go through. Obviously, this is a very condensed bullet points. I think in general, AI does a pretty good job at this kind of thing. Sort of summarizing a transcript, for instance. But it's probably worth going through the transcript, which is a little bit of a pain because it's not always formatted the best, and there's typos and weird stuff that happens there. But or at least going through kind of the more detailed bullet points and sort of making sure that there's no additional points that we skipped. But for right now, I think we'll just kind of move on to the next interview for now, and then we'll kind of circle back here as time allows. There's a lot of uh, there's a lot of specific things in here, right? Like, so content marketing was like previously non-existent. They had, a very thin website. There were some layoffs and like restructuring that happened. So yeah, there's a lot of other bullet points that didn't make it into this, like these brief summaries. So again, it'll probably be worth it for us to swing back there in a bit. Okay, let me get ready for this next one. Before we jump in, let me quickly switch over here to chat, see what y'all are saying. Will this be recorded? Tuba, yes, this is recorded. Basically, you can use this same link at any time. It's going to bring you back to the recording. You can start at the beginning. So yeah, feel free to watch this at your leisure. I didn't hear anything from Sedant, but let me know again if there's anything in terms of like the video quality here. If you're not able to see or read this, let me know and I'll see if I can tinker with the settings. But I'm a little bit constrained here because I've only got the one screen that I'm able to share on right now. So, but I'm happy to make adjustments as I can. All right. Another quick mention, by the way, is if you do have questions as I'm going through all this, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll get back into it. So let me just grab a drink here. So this, real quick, before we get any further. Okay, so this person, I would say is like a more senior person. They've been held pretty high ranking titles at many different companies. Most of those titles were sort of content adjacent. So, if we think about sort of the content leader being like a head of content or someone like that who kind of leads a team that is responsible for creating content to support some of these other teams. In this case, it's sort of the other side of that coin. So this person, their job is, primarily a head of growth, demand gen, brand, that kind of thing. That being said, I sort of talked to them through the lens of, who was the person in charge of content at these orgs and what did their job look like, that kind of thing. So kind of an outsider's perspective, but I still included it in this like batch of interviews because I think, they ultimately spoke a lot to kind of what their job was, the content person's job was, and how that kind of fit into the org. So I think it's valuable from that perspective as sort of an outsider's view on that role. Let me scroll down here. Let's start here with the roles. Okay. So as you can see here, the bullet points here are a bit mixed again because we discussed this person's role, but then we also talked about the role of the content director within those orgs, or the head of content person, as it were. And so what we want to focus on here, I think, is this component, right? So responsible for overseeing content creation, whether through internal teams or external agencies, which I think. Let's just tweak this slightly. So we're going to say that they're generally in charge of leading all content creation. I think effort is maybe too broad because one of the things that we've talked about already that we sort of recognize is that, unfortunately, many of these folks in this role are not always involved in sort of the content strategy portion of it at sort of the genesis of these content requests. And they're really mostly focused on the content creation. And so that's something that we're going to want to zoom in on here as we go through this. So yeah, it looks like this is talking about their role as a consultant and advisor. Let me just scroll back up here. Ownership of content is crucial for integration over different organizations. So some marketing content, no one size fits all. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it looks like content marketing often operates as a service team, fulfilling requests in various departments. So that's kind of what we talked about before, right? This support function, or another way that I've heard described as like a service org. meaning, it's sort of like an internal agency essentially, right? So you come to them, to the head of content, and the head of content is the person who sort of makes sure that the content gets created. Um, let's come back down here to our goals, revenue alignment. So, unsurprisingly, this person who was, in charge of like demand gen and those types of roles in the past, very focused on how do we tie content to revenue, or how do we, make sure that we're integrating these things. Um, here's a good piece of it, right? So we talked about getting bandwidth and resources to create foundational content. We talked about optimizing the content workflow and minimizing from scratch content. Uh, I think this is another good one, right? So maximizing the impact of content by using it strategically across different formats and channels. So it kind of goes back to that idea of like repurposing, but even beyond that, it's like, how do we just sort of like get the most out of this thing? How do we treat this content like an asset, rather than just sort of like a commodity that like just kind of flows in and flows out? Um, the other thing that I'll note here is, at a high level, one of the goals for many folks in this role is some kind of revenue from content. If they can, measure or attribute that in any way, that's definitely sort of a quantitative metric that a lot of these folks are interested in being able to measure, or perhaps the other stakeholders are interested in being able to measure. As we talked about before, I think that's a challenge for a lot of teams. They just don't have the available tools or data to really get a precise measurement of that. But nevertheless, I think there are a lot of teams that either try or do, measure that, as sort of as granular a level as possible. The other thing that I'll mention here is like, organic traffic is another big goal that we heard a lot. So I didn't document that from the last interview, but it's worth adding here because I think, again, if we think about sort of quantitative goals or metrics, that was a big one that we heard a lot about. Clear definition of strategic needs. Okay, so seen as order takers rather than strategic enablers. Okay, so this is a big one. Okay, uh, so we've already talked about, sort of all of these things that are worries or challenges for these folks. Um, but I think this is perhaps the biggest, if not one of the, it's definitely one of the biggest, if not the biggest, through line or like narrative that I heard. Right, is uh, the role that is often being played here is sort of this support function or this service org, and because of that, many folks are worried that their content team is seen as order taker rather than a strategic enabler, meaning people just throw us requests for content, we crank it out, we send it back. There's not really any sort of strategic thinking that goes into the content itself. There's not really a sort of strategic alignment piece where the content team is sort of orchestrating the content being created by multiple teams. It becomes sort of a purely output focused role. And I think for a lot of folks, that feels bad. And so I think that's a big one that we're going to want to highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to drop this in here. We'll probably iterate on exactly how we want to frame this, but I'm even going to bold this because I think this is a big one. And I think the other side of that coin is that also leads to a goal that many of these folks have, which is that if they sort of find themselves in that position where they are being sort of relegated to execution, one of their big goals is to sort of elevate content into a strategic role. I think that's a big one. So you can imagine, if you're not a head of content and you're watching this, you can imagine that as a head of content, you likely came in with the expectation that you would be, sort of orchestrating. You would be kind of the conductor who's pulling all these different strings and kind of putting everything together. And so if that becomes, your day to day is just on the content treadmill, cranking out, blog posts to make sure that, you don't get in trouble from all these stakeholders, that doesn't feel like the best use of your skills or your expertise. And so it makes sense that if you are in that position, one of your big focuses probably is to say, okay, how do I kind of reset the expectations? How do I elevate myself, my team to be to be sort of at the same level as all of these other internal teams that are sort of throwing content requests at us without involving us in sort of the strategic discussions. So I think that's a big one. Internal politics and misalignment. That's an interesting one. I think that we sort of documented that already here, aligning cross-functional internal stakeholders, getting buy-in. I think that speaks to a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about. Broad and undefined content roles. Yeah, I think that might be worth documenting. I'm trying to think if that fits more into worries or more into goals. Um, yeah, maybe just like lack of definition or clear scope for content. I think content can mean many things to many people, and so I think that's sort of what this person was getting at, is that as a content leader, it's not always clear what it sort of falls under your purview, what is in scope for your for content, and what is out of scope, that kind of thing. The needs for agencies and internal teams to stay on top of industry trends, best practices to ensure content remains relevant and effective. Yeah, this is a good one. Adaptability to trends, right? So I think we've seen this especially lately, and especially for teams that are heavily focused on SEO. Uh, I'm sure you all are very aware. There've been a lot of changes happening in the world of SEO. So I think staying up to date on latest trends, channels, best practices regarding content. That's perhaps the number one question that I get these days is should I be thinking about Google AI reviews? And if yes, what should I be doing? Should I be doing things differently, or should they be the same? Do I need a different strategy for that? Things like that. So I think that's a good one for sure to think about. Okay. Now we are heading towards the next interview. Let me take a quick pause here. I'm going to grab a drink and then also check the chat and see where we're at. Okay. I don't see any new questions or input there. As I've said a couple times, if you do have any questions or anything, feel free to pop those in while we're doing the crazy vortex here. I'll give a quick plug to Tofu. If you're not already a member of our free community, we're almost at 4,000 members. You guys, I'm not gonna lie, that's crazy to me. I think we started the year at 2,000, maybe 2,500, and so now we're almost at 4,000. We don't do any paid marketing or anything. It's just a free community. We just post it and promote it. I've heard a lot of folks talking about Tofu and sort of inviting other people to join. So really appreciate that. But yeah, if you're not already a member of Tofu, pop over there, join tofu.co. It's 100% free. The main thing is the Slack community. As I said, about 4,000 people already in there. And it's a good mix of freelancers, agency owners, in-house marketers, and a lot of folks who are focused on writing and content creation, a lot of folks who are more SEO focused. So it's a great group. We get a lot of good conversations, a lot of good questions, people giving feedback, sharing ideas. One of the main draws, of course, is the work opportunities. We do have, I don't know, between 50 and 100 work opportunities that generally get shared in Tofu each week. And those are also a mix of freelance project work, in-house jobs, all kinds of stuff. So if you're in content, if you're in SEO, you're not already a member of Tofu, pop on over there, join tofu.co. We'd love to have you. Just why so detailed, but what if we don't have a personal level access to people who want to target any other ways? Oh, hey, Hassan, what's going on? So let me take this question here. Here, let me pause my screen share for a second while we tackle this question. Can I resize this? I don't know if I can. Doesn't look like it. Okay. All right. I guess I'll just block my face for right now. Okay. So Hassan's question. Here we learn about clients' worries and goals through interviews. That's why it was so detailed. Is what if we don't have personal access to people you want to target? Any other ways? Uh, yeah, great question, Hassan. So obviously, yeah, we've done a good amount of effort up front to conduct these interviews that we're now going through together. That is a big challenge for a lot of teams, is just sort of getting on the phone, talking to people. Uh, I think it is possible to do this kind of work without first person interviews. I don't think it'll be as good. I don't think the outcome will be at the same level or the same quality, because you just won't get those like minute details and those like specific insights that happen generally when you're having like a one-on-one conversation with someone. So I would say, my first recommendation is like figure out what that barrier is to getting access to these people, and try to solve that. If you can, set up that interview, set up those interviews, have those discussions, even if it's just 3 to 5 people. I think you'll just get much richer insights from them by getting on the phone and actually talking to people. So that's my first recommendation, is if you can get on the phone and talk to them. I don't know what your particular barriers are, but there's a lot of ways that you can do this, right? I mean, a lot of the interviews that I set up, I just like reached out to people on LinkedIn. I said, hey, I'm just talking to people, trying to glean insights. Can I get 30 minutes of your time? Another thing that you can often do too, there are sites like Clarity.fm, Winter. There are a bunch of these sites where like basically you can just like pay to talk to people. And so, if you're trying to reach somebody and maybe, they're just not in your network or whatever it is, that might be another way to do it. I would say if interviews really are off the table, if it's not an option, the second best thing that I would say is like some kind of an asynchronous uh, interaction. So like a survey, for instance. Can you do a survey and share that in your target audience, and just at least like get some sort of data points or something that they'll share with you. There's a whole, I won't go into all of the details about how to run an effective survey, because that would be its own live stream. But there are a lot of things that you want to follow there. There are a lot of ways to incentivize people to complete your survey, those types of things. That would be my second. That would be my second recommendation for sort of still collecting some level of primary information without getting on the phone and actually talking to people. Uh, Finally, I'll say this: if for whatever reason none of those are an option, I don't know, maybe these people live in Antarctica or something, and you can't talk to them, or they don't have internet access or whatever. Then I would say it's possible to do this via just like sort of third party research, right? So, when we do strategies for clients, a lot of times, we try to get a lot of insight from the client, but we often don't do, sort of primary research, primary interviews with their customers. So we, rely on what they can provide us, and then we sort of supplement that with secondary research. A lot of times, what that looks like is social and community channels. So going onto Reddit, for instance, finding discussions that people are having, comments that people are sharing, questions they're asking, using that to kind of glean the insights. The challenge is that you don't get to ask the questions directly that you want to ask. So you have to kind of take what they're talking about and try to like interpret it, right? So they might be talking about, you know, hey, my job is really hard, and like I'm struggling with my boss and he's being a jerk or whatever. And then you've got to take that and be able to say like, oh, okay, like the problem that they're experiencing is that their boss, isn't bought into the content strategy or whatever, right? So you've got to be able to kind of reinterpret the things that you find online a lot of times, and it's not as straightforward as like, tell me what your biggest challenge is. Tell me how you're being blocked from doing your job. Those types of direct questions. Um, so yeah, I think again, it is possible to go through the same process at least. I do think that you won't get sort of the same richness of insight without talking to folks directly, in my opinion, in my experience. But yeah, great question. Okay, one more quick shout out to jointofu.co. If you're not already in there, go pop in. And we're gonna get back to it here in just a second. Let me just do a quick lap here, and let me just check in on kind of socials and things. Make sure the world's not burning down while we're doing this. uh, uh, Interesting. Okay. Someone saying that they got kicked out of this live stream. Okay, somebody was saying that they got kicked out. It looks like on LinkedIn specifically. Uh, so first of all, sorry if that happened to you. I'm not sure what happened there. I'm not sure if that was like a timing thing or what, but pop in the chat. Let me know if you're experiencing any issues here, and we can try to troubleshoot. Um, yeah. Other than that, looks like everything is good. Celebrating my comment. Okay, cool. Awesome. I am not going to open Slack because I'll get sucked into the vortex. So let's just get into it. Let's get back into it. All right, so let me share my screen again. I think again, I think I have to share my entire window for you to be able to see my sort of side by side tabs. So bear with me here for the mirror here. Okay. All right, so next interview here. This person is the head of branded content, specifically video editing software with about 200 employees. They're kind of on the top end of this the spectrum. So if we go back to our persona details here, this person is probably a little bit early, or the company's a little small for kind of this particular persona. But in general, and based on the conversation that we had, I still felt like they fit mostly into this ICP category. So let's talk about the roles, goals, and worries here. AI did kind of its own thing in this case. So the role, basically, AI broke this down for us in three different parts. So basically, they categorize the role as first and foremost, they're a leader of organic search efforts. So that's something to keep in mind here. I mentioned this at the top, but just as a reminder, titles are often very misleading. So you'll probably find this in your own, if you're conducting your own research, that kind of thing. But don't always take a title at its face value. And that's also one of the reasons why we don't necessarily want to just say, like, this person only holds the title of head of content, because what you find is that different teams are structured different ways. And based on, all kinds of factors, somebody like this who has the title of head of branded content, which may not seem like it relates to, for instance, SEO or organic search. Nevertheless, that's actually their primary goal, right? Is growing organic search and focus on SEO and content creation. They also act as a bridge between different marketing specialties, such as product marketing and the influencer community. So, again, I think if we think about the role here, it's pretty similar to what we've talked about before. They're basically in charge of like all the content creation. They're managing a team. Again, they're sort of playing that air traffic controller role where they're coordinating content across different functions and kind of trying to integrate those things. Obviously, resource management is a big part of that in any team. Repurposing, having sort of a vision and a workflow for repurposing, I think is also a central role for this particular person. They also are interested in, or part of their role is, again, kind of this, the strategic planner or sort of the integration piece of it. But they also mentioned specifically branded versus non-branded, uh, which is sort of or I should say brand versus non-brand, which is sort of an interesting dichotomy. But it makes sense, right? So, I think, first of all, I think a lot of people think of brand as sort of a catch-all for like something that's not tied to a specific growth metric, right? So, brand can mean a lot of things, just like thought leadership or, any of these other sort of catch-all terms. Basically, I think if I, reading between the lines, I think the way that people use these terms, what they mean is that, like, you can't measure this based on traffic or leads or revenue. You have to measure it some other way. And so I think that's perhaps something that's worth noting here. I would say that's actually a worry, perhaps, or maybe a goal, is like balancing sort of content that can be measured on a performance basis versus content that can't. I think that is perhaps one of the through lines here as well, and this person definitely spoke to that in our conversation. So I'm gonna put that in here. So balancing like sort of measurable or like attributable content versus you know is unattributable. Yeah, unattributable is a word, right? Unattributable. Please don't make fun of my terrible typos that probably exist in this spreadsheet. Balancing measurable slash attributable content versus unattributable or brand content. I think that's kind of what they're getting at here. Um, and then interestingly, sort of going the other way, right? So they also mentioned, hey, I want to balance these two sort of goals or these two sort of ends of the spectrum, if you will, but then also focusing on leveraging SEO content to sort of support these other functions. So taking sort of that like more attributable content and using it in other ways, or using it to also support other functions. So I think that's a good note for the goal, which the goal section, which is like, I mean, it's sort of speaking to this, like maximizing the impact of content by using it strategically. But I think it's like another like more specific goal here, which is, sorry, I'm not frozen. I'm thinking. Which is like translating content across functions, maybe. I don't know if I'm not in love with that framing, but basically what I'm trying to articulate here is that we're taking content that's been created, and we're not just like repurposing or repackaging it, but we're actually like translating it for a different audience or a different channel or a different goal. I think which sort of goes one step beyond just like sort of traditional repurposing, at least how most teams do it, which is you kind of take content and you kind of slice and dice it, but you don't generally change like the heart of it or like the goal of it. Where I think in this case, what she's describing is taking the SEO content and actually like using it for a totally different purpose, which again just feels to me like sort of an elevated goal for repurposing. Content aligns with SEO goals and brand messaging. Okay, yeah. So this is something that we didn't actually talk about here, but we should probably note. Let me just add a bunch of rows here so we don't have to keep adding more and more. Sorry, I'm sort of finicky about my spreadsheet. Where'd my merge go? Oh, there it is. Oh, crap. Okay, so what I was trying to say is that part of their role is, again, probably seems obvious. You're leading all content creation, you're managing your team of in-house and external, but yeah, you need to like find, vet, and hire writers, freelancers, agencies, right? So you're sort of managing, this person is sort of managing those engagements or those people or teams that work under them. They're also ensuring content aligns with both SEO goals and brand messaging. Yeah, so that's another point here for the role, which again is overarching, but we didn't touch on it before, which is that like this person is kind of like the editor in chief a lot of times, right? So they're sort of responsible for the quality and alignment of content, right? So if there's a bunch of typos or the content's like low quality, a lot of times kind of falls back on this person, and it's their job to kind of figure out why or to fix it. So I think that they are kind of the editor in chief in a lot of ways. Let's go to goals here. Organic search aligned with brand strategy. Again, sort of an interesting combination there, but I think sort of speaks to this particular role. Seeks to make SEO content relevant to both search engines and human audiences. That seems too obvious to me to be really like a valuable insight. Wants to improve communication and collaboration between SEO team and other departments. Okay, so I think this, again, this speaks to internal alignment, aligning those cross-functional stakeholders. Strive for seamless integration of SEO insights into broader marketing and product initiatives. Uh, Thank you for the jargon, AI. I don't really know if that's its own bullet point worth noting. SEO insights into broader marketing and product initiatives. Yeah, I'm gonna leave that for now. I might come back to it. Plans to expand the team, increase the volume of high quality content, looks to establish long term relationships, stable growth. Yeah. Okay. So that's a good point here. Again, so expanding the team, increasing the volume of high quality content, looks to establish long term relationships with a stable group of external writers. Um, I think one of the overall goals is like scaling content output, right? We talked about maintaining quality at scale as like a worry, uh, but before that becomes a worry, right? I think a lot of folks, like, one of their main goals is like, how do we just do more? How do we make more? How do we publish more stuff? And so figuring that out, which of course requires logistics, hiring, workflows, etc. Right? So that's a challenge. Uh, well, it's, I guess, as I've documented here, it's a goal first, and then it becomes a challenge when they realize that a lot of those things can go awry. Um, Misalignment in silos. They're concerned about basic lack of communication, worried about disjointed approach lead to missed opportunities and inefficiencies. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, so um, I'm gonna call it missed opportunities, inefficiencies, and wasted cycles. And I think this is another, like, really, sort of deeply resonant thing for folks in this role, which is that if you are sort of on this content treadmill, right, and you're trying to do all this stuff, not only do you not have time to really think about the strategy, or sometimes play the strategic role that you want to play, or wish you could play, uh, but I think you're also just like incredibly scared that if you try to change something up, or like uh, make a move to sort of break that cycle, that it's actually going to backfire, right? And that you're going to waste a bunch of time or energy or effort uh, doing something that doesn't work, and then you're going to be even further behind than you would have been if you just stayed on the treadmill. And so I think that is a big worry and a big sort of fear and a pain point here. And it's worth noting that we're documenting these as roles, goals, and worries because that's the framework that I prefer. But you can sort of articulate these insights in a lot of different ways. And a couple of the big ones, are pain points. I think that's a pain point, right? If you were to translate this into another framework, that would be a clear pain point, right? Which is that I can't take my eye off the treadmill for a second because it'll kick my ass basically. And so I've gotta just stay heads down, and I never get the chance to really look around, or try something new, um, or experiment. In a lot of cases that even means that, like, hey, I really need to spend time like hiring more writers so that I can get unstuck, or finding an agency to help offload some of the work that we're doing. But I can't risk the cycles to do that, because again, if it fails, or if it takes longer than I expected, or something else goes wrong and it backfires, now I'm back to square one. And by the way, I've spent all this time doing that, and we missed all these opportunities, we wasted all these cycles, and we've got more work than ever. And now we're never going to get caught up, or we're never going to get ahead. So I think that's a big one. Here's another one, for a worry, which is the process of managing external writers, and you could extrapolate that to an agency in some cases too, right? Managing external writers or agencies becomes its own sort of bottleneck, right? So if, again, going back to what we just talked about, if you're already time strapped and now you bring out a bunch of writers who are supposed to save you a bunch of time or help you scale your output, but it ends up taking half of your time managing them, well then, did you really get ahead, or did you just sort of set yourself back even further? Of course, a brand might be undervalued, misunderstood, challenges to getting buy-in from other team and stakeholders from okay. I think the rest of these kind of roll up into some of these points that we've already articulated here, so I'm not going to go any further on those. Let's jump to interview 4. Let me start here. So this person was a director of content marketing at a market research company, about 1,000 to 5,000 employees. Okay, so this person oversees the entire content marketing team. We already know that. They manage content creation process, boom, align content strategy, product marketing, overall business goals. So pretty much the same in terms of roles here. Quality, KPIs, develop team member specialization, career growth, excellence liaison between content and other departments. Okay, so in this case, if I remember correctly from this interview, the way this team structure is a little different in that they have sort of a separate, like writing team, and then like a design or like a creative team that they work with, rather than like an integrated, kind of cross-functional content team. So it was a little different, I think, from some of the others, but yeah, same basic ideas here. One thing I will mention, and we'll add to the sheet here, is that production and output. I think a lot of people don't like this, but yeah, like content published or content velocity, a lot of times for lack of a better metric, becomes kind of a default way of measuring a content team. So I think, production and content quality, again, even if we argue that that's not a great way to measure content performance, that is sort of the thing that makes the most sense to executives a lot of times. So integrates new tools, best practices into content strategies, identified opportunities, cross-functional initiatives, plans, and adjusts content strategies based on performance metrics and industry changes. Okay, so so this kind of is what we talked about already, right? So identifying opportunities for cross-department or like cross-functional initiatives and campaigns. Here's a good one. We haven't really talked. I mean, we sort of touched on the idea of like reporting and KPIs and stuff, but we haven't really talked about like how that actually looks in practice. Um, from these conversations, I think measuring content, as I said before, is a perpetual challenge for most teams, and especially once you get outside of the most straightforward channels, like SEO, where you've got at least some kind of North Star metrics that are easy to measure, and then it's sort of technically possible to measure more complex metrics like revenue, but once you get into things like brand or awareness content, I think a lot of companies struggle on that. But I want to go kind of one step further than that in sort of thinking about this goal, which is like why is that valuable? What one thing that definitely feeds into this is that idea of buy-in, right? So a lot of times reporting is valuable specifically because it helps you get buy-in or sort of supports your case, for or defends your budget, or that kind of thing. Which actually I'm going to put that in here, defending budget, because I think that's a big one, especially right now. That content budgets and SEO budgets are being called into question based on all the stuff that's happening in the world. But I think there's one further thing there, which is that it's sort of like I think there's a desire for a lot of content folks to have that data um, for their own purposes, right? So to be able to say, hey, this type of content performed the best, or these topics seem to resonate the most, um, and sort of close that loop. I think that's a goal for a lot of these folks. And I think from the conversations that I had, most of them are quite far away from that, unfortunately. But nevertheless, I think that is kind of an underlying theme there. Is that, like, if I just had sort of the right data, the right visibility, I could, make my strategy better. I could be smarter about the way that we plan content. I could say no to content more easily because I could say, hey, look, you want to do this thing. Last time we did that, it totally tanked. Um, so I think having data as sort of a rudder for your strategy, I think is a big goal here. Um, yeah. Oh, so this is a good thing. We should definitely unpack this. Before we jump down there, let me go back here. So liaison, I feel like I skipped something I was going to add. Develop team members' career growth opportunities. Each writer meets their production KPI. Oh yeah. Okay. Here's here's an interesting one. So integrates new tools and best practices into content strategies. I think that's primarily a role, which, I mean, I know it's under roles here, but I was thinking about adding it somewhere else. I think it's primarily a role, which is that sort of like a lot of these folks, I think, have become sort of the de facto internal subject matter expert on things like AI, content, SEO, all this stuff. I think they're getting asked a lot of questions about these types of things, and they don't always have the answer. They're not always, a super technical SEO person who understands like the intricacies of how AI overviews work. Uh, but nevertheless, because they, sort of touch on SEO, I think a lot of people are looking to them for guidance on this kind of thing. And so I think that's an interesting challenge there, and maybe a worry. We kind of talked about this, staying up to date on the latest trends, channels, and best practices, but we could probably expand on that, or expound on that one level further, which is that, like, being knowledgeable about changes in AI or SEO, in particular. I mean, I think that applies even more broadly, but I think right now, especially, we're seeing a lot of questions and pushback around those two topics in particular. Um, this is the goal, but I think translates into a worry, which is, uh, unpredictable traffic, rankings, performance. I mean, I think almost everyone's feeling that right now. I mean, I think with everything happening with AI and Google and AI overviews and all this stuff, right? Like, traffic and rankings are just like way less predictable than they used to be. It's not a situation where it's like, okay, we rank number one, we can, look away for a while. Now it's like, oh, we rank number one this week, and next week we rank number 7. And by the way, now our traffic dropped 20%. And what do I tell my CEO? So I think that sort of fluctuation and data, overall uh, uncertainty is creating a lot of angst, and is also making it difficult to sort of explain away some of those things for people. Streamlining the content creation process, focusing on optimizing existing blogs. I mean, we kind of talked about already the idea of maximizing the impact. I think that kind of gets to this, which is sort of like repurposing, also, and but also like maintaining and refreshing content, fostering growth team. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We haven't really touched on that as well. Depending on sort of how the team is structured, one of the main goals here is, build, foster, internal content team. Right, these people are generally in leadership roles, so if they do have an internal team or an in-house team, a lot of times, that a big part of their role is just like day-to-day, like people management stuff. Ensure a balanced workload, prevent burnout. Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, worries. I mean, I think that's a great worries, right? Like, content burnout. who amongst us is not feeling a little bit of that over the last few years, if not forever? Evergreen content with input from product marketing. Cool. Insufficient briefs leading to inefficiencies, subpar content, frustration with the process of gathering necessary information. Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, so just like the tactical piece of like getting somebody to spend 10 minutes with you and like tell you what you need to know about a particular topic so that you can create content about that topic. I think that's a big one. So I think like getting stakeholder / SME input. I think that's a worry. I mean, it's possibly also a goal. But I think more than anything, it's like a worry because I think the it's one of those things that's like easier said than done, And so I think it quickly becomes a worry rather than just a goal. Impact of Google algorithms change. So again, we kind of talked about that, but unpredictable traffic rankings performance, need to adapt to cope with those factors, ensuring that writers meet their KPIs. Yeah. I love that. Production demands with the need for high quality content. So we talked about that already, balancing cost and quality, managing the integration of freelancers into the content team, particularly in areas requiring less product knowledge, ensuring that freelancers can produce content that meets the company standards. Yeah. Did we talk about that? I think we talked about content quality at scale. Yeah, I guess we could. I thought we talked about this already, but yeah, I mean, I guess like beyond just that scale, it's also like maintaining content quality and like brand guidelines when outsourcing. So maybe that kind of goes hand in hand with this. But yeah, like that's obviously a big one is that like, hey, I want to scale my team by hiring an agency or a bunch of freelancers or whatever. But it only works if those people can deliver the level of content that we need. Let's get into this next one. I'm pretty sure I know who this is. So let's get a little bit more specific. This person is a senior content marketing manager at an HR software company, 1,000 to 5,000 employees. So once again, kind of fit within our persona here. Let's go down here. Let's see what we've got. So oversees campaign content, landing pages, and ad copy, works with the web team or CRO, collaborates with another senior content marketing manager who handles organic content, blogs, downloadables. Okay, so this particular person, right? So basically they work in a content org where there are two people who hold the same title, senior content marketing manager, and then they have sort of split those responsibilities across the two of them. This particular person is focused primarily on campaign content, landing pages, and ad copy. And then the other person is more focused on scaling organic traffic with like blog posts and creating downloadable content, ebooks and that kind of thing. Part of an integrated marketing team. Content auditor and optimizer conducts content audits to identify top and low performers, analyzes content performance to establish best practices. Okay. So I think overall, this kind of aligns with what we've already captured. This is kind of a new role that I'm not sure that the other folks share. I think it's maybe a goal for a lot of people. We didn't really dive into this particular topic too much in our interviews, so I'm not sure how much other content leaders are really thinking about this right now. But yeah, like obviously we've already talked about optimizing the content workflow and where's the other one? Maximizing the impact of the content. But I'm not sure if they're thinking a lot about like things like content audits, or if it's mostly just about like each new piece, how do we maximize the impact, rather than, forward looking only rather than like retrospective or retroactive. Might be worth noting. I'm going to leave it out for now again, just because we didn't really touch on that with anyone else. So I don't know if that's like sort of a universal kind of goal, or if it's just sort of more specific to this person's role. Obviously, this person is probably more in the weeds of like analytics and things, working with like the CRO team, for instance, than probably your average head of content. But I don't know. That's just my speculation. This might be a gap in our interviews. We'll see if any of the other final interviews sort of corroborate that idea of like, conducting content audits or like retroactively reviewing content performance kind of stuff. Goals, break down silos. Ooh, love that. Okay. I mean, we've talked about, getting buy-in, aligning cross-functional teams. I mean, I think that's worth noting. Breaking down silos, content, just content in general. I think again, content is kind of everything, and so I don't think it's about a particular type of content marketing or a particular channel or anything like that. I think it's just, hey, we're making all this content for all these different purposes, and we need people to be working together, or at least aware of what the others are doing. Yeah. Okay. So here's we talked about this, which is elevating the content into a strategic role. I think that's a big one. Foster better communication, establish baseline metrics, and perform A/B testing. Yeah. So again, I think this person is maybe more sophisticated than a lot of the other content teams, where they're they're looking at things like A/B testing their content, and again, that's probably a function of their particular role. Thinking about landing pages, ad copy, you tend to A/B test those more than say a blog post. So I think that's super valuable and super interesting to know that that's a big part of their role, but probably not as universal as some of the other things that we've documented. So I'm probably going to leave those for now. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Prioritizing high quality content over sheer volume, ensuring that content is strategically aligned with overall marketing goals. I think there are two layers to that bullet point. The one is extremely obvious, right? So at face value, prioritizing high quality content over sheer volume. But I think there's actually maybe a deeper insight there, which is that as with all marketing, it depends, right? So I think that the actual goal, or perhaps like the overarching goal here, is to like align quality and volume with each like individual piece of content. Like let's just say, hypothetical example, we're gonna roll out a glossary, of keywords that our audience searches. It's probably not that important that is the highest quality content on the internet. It's probably more important that we hit the volume and the scale that we're trying to achieve. Now, just to be clear, I'm not recommending that everybody goes out and starts a glossary. I think interesting strategy, specific use cases for that. But the point being is that for any given piece of content, for any given strategy or tactic in your content marketing strategy, there's sort of an appropriate level of quality versus an appropriate volume of output or cost, if you will. And it's not always the same. It depends on how important that content is, where it fits in the funnel, all of this stuff, right? Like, if I'm writing a piece from the CEO, probably care a lot more about the quality of that content and make sure that it's, perfectly on message and, it's sort of the highest level of polish that we have. Whereas again, if I'm, mass producing 100 pages of content for a programmatic SEO play, then I'm probably not as particular, and I'm more interested in efficiency. So I think maybe that's the way to do it. Aligning appropriate level of quality versus efficiency based on specific content goals. I think I'll leave it at that. I think that's specific, but vague enough. Redefining KPIs to include higher funnel engagement, create comprehensive content calendar. That's a minute content. Oh yeah, that's a good one. We haven't really. I mean, we said lead all content, air traffic controller, but also just at a tactical level, they're often responsible for like coordinating, planning, scheduling all content, right? So again, kind of bleeds into that air traffic controller role. obviously a big part of an air traffic controller's job is to coordinate planes so they don't crash into each other. But nevertheless, it's worth calling that out, I think, as a separate, part of the role. Okay, worries, siloed organizations. Yes, yes, yes. Inefficiencies, duplicated efforts. Once again, we talked about that down here. Missed opportunities, inefficiencies, wasted cycles. Big one, I think. Let me just bold that because I think that's a good one to focus on. Faces challenges with teams being resistant to new ways of working, experimenting with content strategies, cultural resistance. I think this kind of buy-in. It's kind of a buy-in thing. Getting the right data, getting buy-in. We're about to push for high content volume at the expense of quality. I hear you. Concern that content created without strategic alignment and proper planning dilutes the brand and fails to meet objectives. Ooh, so good, so good. I mean, I think that falls here, right? It's like a wasted cycle at the core, right? Like it's like, hey, if we spend a bunch of money creating content, but we didn't have a good plan going into it, then is that content now worthless? Basically, did we waste that time and money doing this thing, and it's not worth anything? So I think that's a big one. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna keep that for now. I don't think we need to add a separate bullet point for that. Manager struggles with buy-in from various teams. High level encounters issues with teams trying to bypass integrated marketing team. Yeah, there you go. That's people going around content. I think that's a big one. I heard a couple of different folks talk about that, where people don't want to wait, or they don't want to go through our process, or they don't want to create a brief, or whatever, just like dumb excuse people have. So they went out and like hired a freelancer to do it, and they didn't have any of the brand guidelines, or like it just doesn't fit stuff. If you've seen a brand that puts out something that seems like wildly off brand, it's a pretty good chance that's what happened. Anyway, let's get down to the final one here. I think we got two more actually, but we got to roll because we still got a whole other persona to go through before we wrap up for today. So let me try to fly through this one a little faster, and then I'm going to take a quick break, grab a refill of my water, and use the restroom. Okay, so this person is a director of inbound marketing at a software company. This is actually we'll just leave it at a software company for now, and 1 to 5,000 employees. Their role, manage a team with roles such as director of paid media, managing editor, limited day-to-day interaction with paid media team, affecting overall team collaboration. Previously led a team focusing on organic content as part of the broader inbound marketing strategy, which both included paid and organic efforts. Okay. So yeah, this person, we're going to want to be a little cautious about how much we use their bullet points here, not because anything they said is invalid or not valuable, but because their role is like sort of actively being changed right now. And so there were a lot of question marks about like, this is what we used to do. We knew it didn't work, and so we're trying to fix it. So I think it's again, just worth being cautious about how much we take these as like universal bullet points. Famously led a team focusing on organic content as part of the Okay, so I don't see anything in here. Yeah, I don't see anything in here that is sort of new from what we've already basically captured here. The only real thing that's kind of new is that this person was more tightly integrated with paid. The other folks have not really talked about things like paid marketing or paid search as really a part of their role. So this person did have sort of a slightly broader mandate as a head of inbound. Aim to establish more content focus to drive organic growth. So, organic traffic, again, is sort of a primary metric or KPI here. Full funnel approach, top of funnel awareness, post-marketing, reaching the target audience effectively. Clear goals, aim to use tools like Ahrefs, SEMrush, and proprietary event tracking. By the way, as an unofficial ambassador, I'm not paid directly. I'm not paid to endorse SEMrush, I should say. They changed their stylization. It's just like that, okay? Strive to secure adequate resources for organic content. Okay. Unclear about exact responsibilities, structure upon returning from. Yeah, so that's what I was saying. This person was returning from parental leave, and there was some change happening. Concerned about the structure, team function, frustrated by lack of collaboration, experienced difficulties in securing resources. Hmm, hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so that's a good one, right? We've talked about we've talked about the challenges of measuring content, and I think a lot of that comes from uh, kind of a level up, which is that one of the other things that I heard from a lot of folks was that there just wasn't a good system. Like they just didn't have a clear goal, right? So like nobody sat them down and said, "Here's your KPI," or "Here's how you're going to be measured." And so because of that, there just wasn't any clarity on like what, yeah, what success looked like, right? So I think that's an important one to toss in here. Is that it sort of cuts both ways, right? If someone sets a goal but you don't have a great way to measure it, that sucks. But also, if there is no goal, then how do you measure? How do you possibly measure it? And how do you sort of predict if you've done a good job or not? And this person, I know, their our discussion was a difficult one. They talked a lot about some of those internal politics and challenges and things. And one of the big ones was like they just didn't have any sort of clarity about what they were supposed to be doing or what was successful. And so because of that, often some pretty difficult conversations with their manager. Um, yeah, as you can see here, that's about job security. Potential negative impact of poor internal communication bureaucracy. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big one. I feel like bureaucracy in general and just like lack of communication is just such a universal thing that I don't know if it's worth documenting as sort of a unique challenge for this particular person. I think almost anybody at any company with more than I don't know 100 employees or something would probably say that that's a problem for them. So I don't yeah, I'm gonna leave that out for now just because it feels like an obvious and sort of not particularly insightful. This person, a content marketing manager, a software company with 500 to 1,000 employees. Let's scroll down here. Generative AI. Oh yeah, so this person, this person worked at a company in the AI space actually. Work closely with demand gen, web, and SEO teams, primarily individual contributor role with a strong emphasis on execution rather than strategy, responsible for creating and repurposing content in various formats. Okay, so this person's role, they were a content marketing manager. They were, however, I would say they were, as they noted here, they were primarily an individual contributor, right? So they weren't really like coordinating a team or setting strategy. They were more just like executing content, um, interface with multiple stakeholders, participates in establishing. Yeah. So again, I'm going to leave some of these bullet points out because these don't reflect the majority of the folks that we talked to that fit into this category. So I don't think this is sort of a universal reflection of this type of role. Yeah, you can see their goals primarily production based, and then organic traffic pipeline. Yeah, I guess that's a pipeline generation. That's sort of a generic term. I'm not sure, different companies sort of quantify or qualify pipeline differently, but putting money in the CRM basically. Ensure all content produced align with overarching marketing goals, OKRs. Focus on creating high quality content. Thought leadership and demand gen. Integrate AI tools into content creation process to enhance efficiency and output quality. Uh, yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it's probably worth its own. Right? Experimenting with AI is like a goal. AI or like effective AI use. I'm sure many of you all probably have strong feelings about AI. If we're being agnostic about it, I think many teams are AI curious at the very least, meaning they want to use AI to sort of the best of the ability, but without compromising on the quality kind of thing. So I think a lot of teams are still in the phase where they're trying to figure out what that looks like or how to do that most efficiently or most effectively. Okay, so struggles with maintaining team members and managing limited resources to meet high content demands. Yep. I mean, I think those are all pretty common. Managing executive expectations for quick results, adapting to frequent requests. Yeah, long term. Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, that's that's a good one. I'm gonna call this. I'm gonna sort of brand this, right. I'm gonna call it like content whiplash. Somebody's probably already coined that term, but right. I think one of the worries of content marketers is, the CEO wakes up one morning and has a blog post idea, and then he tries to get you to write it that afternoon, and then the next day he's confused why it doesn't have a million organic sessions or whatever, right? So it's like content being sort of dictated at a tactical level, but then uh, there's also a lack of buy-in for the overall strategy, right? So it's like we don't believe the strategy is working. Well, the strategy is not working because you're constantly pulling me in 100 different directions. So how it hasn't been a strategy; it's been a bunch of different tactics. Uh, so I think that's a pretty universal feeling there. Mm, okay, I think the rest of these are pretty straightforward, right? So yeah, getting buy-in, setting expectations. Maybe it's kind of its own, potentially its own, but I think we capture some of that sentiment here and like getting buy-in and measuring and sort of communicating here. Actually, measuring or quantifying and communicating. Let's say that the value of content. I think those are both pieces of the puzzle there. We got content quality. Boom, boom, boom. Effective onboarding, briefing of writers and agencies to mitigate use of generic content and delays. Yeah. So we already captured, build, find, vet, hire writers, freelancers, or agencies. Find, vet, hire. I guess technically that's hire and onboard, right? Because you've got kind of two steps there. And then yeah, we already talked about sort of maintaining uh, both consistency of quality, but also like context and understanding and like subject matter expertise when you're outsourcing content. Uh, Lack of context slash expertise. Okay. Well, I think that is a good place for us to wrap up for this particular buyer persona. We do have a whole nother buyer persona that we need to go through. We're already 2 hours in, so I'm gonna have to try to fly through the next section here. Before we get to that, I'm gonna pop over to chat really quick, see how y'all are doing, and then I'm gonna go off camera for about 3 minutes while I use the restroom, grab a soda, etc. Any questions? Anybody want to talk through anything in particular? Who's joining me? Feel free to pop in the chat. I don't see anything new, so I'm gonna pop off now. But yeah, feel free to chime in there in the chat if you've got questions or want me to cover anything in particular. I will BRB. All right, y'all. I am back. Thanks for hanging out. Real quick, if you all are in the chat here, if you commented or reacted on my LinkedIn post last week about these live streams, today I posted the link as a comment in there. My assumption being that you would get a notification that I commented on that post that you had interacted with. Can you let me know in the comments if that's the case, or in the chat, I should say? I'm just curious. I think that's how LinkedIn notifications generally work, right? Is that once you've interacted with a post and then somebody else posts or comments, then you get a notification. But I'm not 100% sure, so I'd love to know. Secondly, you should share this. That'd be awesome. I would love to get more people on here. So yeah, if you're on socials or part of a community or whatever, and you're feeling up to it, I'd love to have folks share this and bring in more people to jam with us. We've got I think probably about an hour here that I've got left to do the live stream. I'll probably I'll try to jam through this next section more quickly so we can get to kind of the end part, which is where we got to make sort of our big decisions here. So let me actually, why don't we do this? Since we spent the first section kind of going through and documenting all of this and downloading it into the sheet, for this one, since we're trying to sort of get to like a decision point, uh, let's instead maybe just like go through the interviews, and then we can sort of contrast them with what we learned from the other persona, because ultimately what we're trying to do at this stage is like make a decision. So yeah, let's do that. Let me pull up my screen share here. I think this is the right one. Yeah, okay. So this is our second set of interview bullets. So as we talked about before, we prior to getting on this call, we sort of reviewed the transcripts and segmented them into two different ICPs. This ICP, I would say, is startup focused. Okay, so this person's job, I think, is like head of content or something. Yeah, they're at a consulting firm, which is like 11 to 500 employees. So basically the persona here is sort of a marketing or content leader at a startup company, generally let's just say less than 200 employees. So for context there, historically that's actually kind of a sweet spot for Optimists. Like, we've worked primarily with like a Series A, maybe Series B startup. Most of those are pretty small, pretty early stage, and we generally tend to get hired by maybe a head of content, but more likely like a head of marketing, a director of marketing, even like a VP or a CMO. And in some cases, even the CEO hired us directly. And we did that because we really wanted to focus on being the full service kind of content team. We wanted to come in and sort of shape the strategy from the outset and really drive everything. And so that seemed to be a sweet spot for that kind of client, where we could come in and say, hey, we are your content marketing team. We are going to drive your content marketing for you. You tell us what the goal is, and we'll put the plan together and then execute it. So that's sort of the persona that we're capturing here. Is sort of I would say like the historical or like traditional buyer or ICP for Optimist over the last 8 years, however long we've been running Optimist. It's been 8 years. So let's dig into the bullet points for this particular role. So this person, oversees content strategy for the company, focusing on YouTube, LinkedIn events, and email marketing, manages a diverse set of responsibilities, including event marketing, acts as the host of the podcast, indicating trust, collaborative team member, work closely with the head of growth, CEO, and the sales team to align efforts, utilizes internal and external insights, engage with freelancers specialized in video editing, showing I don't know why, showing an ability to delegate. Thank you very much, ChatGPT, for demonstrating this person's expertise. Okay, so real quick encapsulation here. This person's role is basically everything, right? So they are both sort of setting the strategy and like planning the content for primarily these channels: YouTube, LinkedIn, events, and email. And then they're also the ones that are sort of actually executing it. So they are primarily responsible for also creating all of the content as part of it. Unsurprisingly, right? It's a fairly small early stage, or not even necessarily early stage, but fairly small company. Uh, and so they're sort of doing it all. They're sort of a one person content team. Um, they are, I think the only thing that they mentioned that they outsourced was like video editing, maybe. And even then, yeah, specialized tasks like video editing. So yeah, I think for the most part, this person is kind of doing it all. Their overall role, if I were to sort of boil that down to bullet points, is like plan the strategy and then like execute the strategy, right? It's sort of everything, all in one. Obviously, it seems a lot easier when you frame it that way, but um, their goals are to drive engagements and leads. So this person is like super tightly tied to like business, like biz dev and generation. They are one of only a very small number of people who are thinking about marketing at this company, and so as such, they're primarily being measured against like that thing we posted last week. Is it getting engagement? Is it driving leads? Are do we have new sales in the pipeline, kind of thing? So very, very tightly coupled with actual lead generation and potentially revenue. Um, yeah, and then sort of their primary lever for achieving that is, I guess there's really two that they mentioned. One is just pure like output or like efficiency, right? So this person is thinking a lot about using AI, streamlining their content production, primarily again because the way that they're looking at it is, I've got a goal. Let's say my goal is 10 leads a month, and in order to do that, I've got to like publish more stuff, right? Like the more stuff I put out, uh, in theory, the more leads I can generate. And so they're focused a lot on that. The other thing, is the other side of the coin, which is the content quality, basically, right? So enhancing your audience understanding, staying up to date. But from my recollection about this conversation, this is sort of the primary driver, right? Is that like the more stuff we can put out, the more leads we're likely to get. Cast a wider net, increase your velocity, etc. Um, Balancing quality and efficiency, resource constraints, limited headspace, and budget to properly brief and manage freelancers for SEO. Yeah. So yeah, this is an interesting one. So this person, right? Again, they're sort of a team of one, and so like resource constraints are sort of probably the primary worry or the primary challenge and barrier for them. They just simply don't have the budget to like outsource most of this work. Uh, and so, even if they wanted to hire freelancers or an agency, probably wouldn't be feasible. So yeah, I think worth noting that, if we think about this through the lens of like an ICP for Optimist, this particular person was probably never an part of that ICP group, because, I think they're just too small, that they probably, they just don't have the budget, right? They just would not have the budget to hire somebody like Optimist. So, I think it's valuable to think about this role and sort of all the hats that they're juggling and that kind of thing. But we should be, acknowledge that they probably would not have ever been sort of an ideal buyer or even a potential buyer. Not in this particular role, at least. Next person, this person is a content marketing manager. They work in the financial services industry, and again, we've got a fairly small company, less than 200 employees. Um, and actually, I can expound on this. This is actually finance software, and this person was content marketing manager. Yeah, so yeah, basically, it's a tech, SaaS in the finance space. So unfortunately, this person was actually recently laid off when I talked to them. It just happened like the week prior or 2 weeks prior. Um, their job was content marketing manager. They report to a content director with an SEO background. They manage editing, website copy, ebooks, case studies. So, a broad range of different types of content. They work with freelancers for technical content. Um, and then Yeah. So here's where I wanted to focus here. So the primary takeaway here from this particular interview for me was that a big part of their job, sort of similar to what we were just talking about with the other person. Uh, First of all, I would say this person in their particular role was potentially closer to an ICP for Optimist, in as sort of a marketing or like a content leader at an early stage company. Um, they leaned heavily on AI, and so that's one of the themes that we're gonna find throughout these interviews. From my recollection, is that these early stage companies, because they are resource constrained, because they are uh, focused heavily on efficiency and output as sort of primary drivers. And I think the other part of this, or perhaps the other main component of that decision to use AI or to lean heavily into AI, um, is because they're at a stage where they simply haven't like quite figured out what works best. And so because they're at that stage, they're just trying a lot of things and they're trying to do a lot of experimentation. And that is obviously, it costs a lot of money to pay people to do that, right? So if you're trying to test SEO as a channel or test LinkedIn as a strategy or whatever, and you're trying to do all of those things at once, and you're a startup and you don't have that much money, one of the only ways that that's like even feasible is to use AI, right? To sort of scale those efforts. So I think that was that's maybe like a, if we were back in our sheet documenting this, I think the role here that I would put is like sort of AI maestro, right? Like this people in these positions at these size companies tend to use AI a lot, and a big part of their job is like figuring out how to kind of use AI to its limits, to its current, best of its current abilities. Um, so yeah, this person used AIs to generate blogs and pillar pages. They mentioned this particular tool called Pen Friend. No affiliation, by the way. I don't never used it. AI tools require human editing. So basically, they became kind of like an AI content editor. That was sort of how they spent most of their time. Uh, on the plus side, they were able to drive a big increase in like organic traffic and organic strategy, those types of things. That's great. Challenges with AI quality and freelancer management. That was kind of one of their main gripes was like, hey, AI is great and it made us much faster, much more efficient, but I had to spend a ton of human hours still like editing and fixing the content and stuff. Um, I they handled they previously worked with a different company. They worked with an agency. So this at this in this case, it was a little different. I think this company was slightly larger, like a little bit later stage. um, and they actually worked with an agency, so their primary focus was on kind of managing that agency and their work. They did, they did sort of collaborate with demand gen and marketing functions, regular communication to align strategies and share performance insights. Newsletter, stay up to date. Okay, so yeah, sorry, I just realized I was going through the the transcript and I had not scrolled all the way down to the roles, goals, and worries part. So yeah, they acted as a bridge. They coordinated these content projects, handled logistics. So I would say this person, if the previous role, we talked about a big part of their job is like content creation, and sort of keeping the plates spinning, if you will, from a content perspective, and that sort of pulls them away from doing, more strategy and planning and coordination. I think in this case, this role, they sort of leaned into AI as a way to offload a lot of the heavy lifting on the content creation side, which has then uh, given them more bandwidth, or sort of shifted their role to more of project management, editing, scheduling. So in one sense, it's sort of a good, a good shift, right? That they're sort of they're sort of being able to sort of sit at a higher level, maybe than some of the folks in the other role. because they're kind of out of some of that day to day because they've offloaded it to AI. So it's an interesting takeaway there. The primary metric here seemed to be SEO and organic growth. I would say that was, universally that was the case. The case was that almost everyone I talked to in both of these persona buckets talked a lot about SEO. Organic growth was a primary goal and metric, but these one distinction I think from these smaller companies versus the larger companies is that the larger companies talked about SEO as sort of like one bucket, right? Or like one channel or one strategy. But they also talked about integrating, content for demand gen and PR and brand campaigns and like all of these other things that were happening. These smaller companies, I think they don't have those teams, right? Like that's not really like an existing function. And so because of that, they're almost exclusively focused on SEO and organic growth from my conversations. Efficiency and scalability again seem to be the primary concern, primary goal here for this particular person. They're definitely uncertain about SEO, which I think also kind of creates like a bit of a feedback loop in my mind, right? Which is that like we don't want to spend a bunch of money on SEO because it might not work. But if we don't spend a bunch of money on SEO, then it may cause it not to work, which means that I'm less likely to spend money on SEO, right? So you sort of have like a bit of a spiral there, I think, around SEO, which is sort of an interesting conundrum. And I'm not quite sure how you untangle that, but an interesting challenge nonetheless. Let's jump to this next person. So this person was head of content, or I'm sorry, no, head of marketing at a software company. The team is about 50 employees, maybe creeping up on 100, so less than 200 employees. Let's not make the same mistake twice. I'm going to scroll down here. So yeah, this person leads the marketing team, but they also kind of oversee like SDR team. So they're kind of like an integrated, like maybe like a go-to-market or something, maybe like a demand gen kind of function. So they're trying to ensure the collaboration between marketing and sales. The main thing that they are focused on from like a marketing perspective is content strategy. Not sure who Eric is. Should have scrubbed that out of here. So basically this person told me that they are sort of primarily focused on a couple different channels. SEO is one of them, but SEO is maybe not like their primary, like their sole focus. They talked a lot about using like LinkedIn and social channels, so sort of creating like social first content, and then also using that kind of social content as a way to support things like community and event marketing. So I would say, from like a go-to-market strategy, this person is sort of pursuing a slightly different strategy than some of the other businesses that we've talked about. They're relying less on SEO. They're relying, they don't have, sort of a formal, demand gen, lead gen kind of function. And so the way that they're approaching this is, hey, we're kind of creating like a social first kind of approach, and then we're sort of repurposing that social content for a bunch of different uses. Interestingly, they have sort of segmented it by different different sort of goals, I guess, throughout the funnel. So pipeline generation, customer acquisition. They're also working with like creators, things like that. So that's another interesting like part of their role, because they're sort of head of marketing. I would say that they're sort of thinking about a broader range of channels at this stage, and they're not as committed to any traditional like content marketing or like SEO playbooks, right? So the old playbook is, we publish content on our blog, maybe we repurpose it for LinkedIn or whatever. They're coming at it from a totally different direction. They're saying, hey, how do we create LinkedIn content? How do we engage these influencers in this space and sort of get them to create content? And then how do we sort of backfill that as like SEO, as like an SEO strategy? Some of the things that they mentioned, is that this sort of approach has been difficult to measure. They want to balance that innovation with practicality, that kind of thing. Excuse me one second. I got to sneeze. Okay. Yeah, balancing the innovation and practicality. So, trying new stuff, but not really sure what's going to work. So, again, I think maybe a through line here between this and some of the previous interviews in this segment are experimentation, a heavy emphasis on sort of trying a bunch of different stuff, but we're not really committed to any of these because we don't have the data to tell us what's working best, or we're still kind of just we're still figuring it out. We don't really know what's the right direction or the right strategy here. This person had a content technology information. So this is another software company, less than 200 employees. Okay, yeah. So this person so they work for a startup. They're the head of content. They're focused primarily on enterprise sales. And so their focus right now is on selecting high volume, low competition keywords that fit the ICP, ensuring content reaches the audience in the right time and place. You are going to be shocked to know that a big part of their approach here, interestingly, it doesn't show it here in the bullet points, but yeah, they basically also talked a lot about trying to use AI, right? So how do they, how do we use AI to scale this? And again, kind of the idea of like aligning the effort of the content with its particular use case, or kind of where it fits in the strategy. And so they talked about how they were sort of in-house. They were focusing more on bottom of the funnel. They were outsourcing to humans some of like the more middle of the funnel content, and then like top of the funnel they were more heavily relying on AI. One thing that we did talk about, I think it's the information was scrubbed from the interview here, but one of the things that we did talk about on this call was sort of the range of budget, and again, unsurprisingly, resources, but i.e. budget, was a very limiting factor for them. And I can tell you, without revealing any details, that like the numbers that this person shared with me, we're well below a size of engagement that would like make sense for a company like Optimist. And so not to maybe like spoil the conclusion here, but I think if we sort of continue through these interviews, the through line here. I guess this is actually the last one that we had in this bucket. So I guess I can kind of spoil the conclusion here. One of the through lines here is that these companies are looking for an incredibly efficient, low cost, but really more so than low cost, high efficiency approach to doing content marketing. I think that's generally the through line here for almost all of these businesses. Or I should say, I think that they're sort of hesitant to commit any significant resources to any specific channel or strategy. So I think if we look at sort of what's changed in content marketing and what's changed in SEO, after having so many of these conversations and these interviews that we're reviewing here, that's one of the through lines that I've really identified from this, is that especially for these like early stage companies, I think that there's a lack of conviction, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it in like there's so much uncertainty that executives, leaders, marketing folks in general, don't have confidence in placing big bets on any particular channel or strategy, and especially for these early stage companies where investing too much in the wrong thing is like literally a life or death decision. I think, yeah, there's just a lot of hesitation about that, and so they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, rather than blowing our entire marketing budget on one thing and it not working, can we, place smaller bets on a broader array of things? And one of the patterns that is enabling that is, of course, AI, right? So AI, lets you, sort of dip your toes into a lot of different stuff. Even if the content is not the best in the world, at least we can sort of get the content out into the world, get some feedback, get some data, try to decide where we might place larger bets in the future. Okay, so again, I realized this was a much quicker run through. We didn't go into nearly as much detail for this particular buyer persona. So apologies again that we sort of are running a bit short on time. So I don't want to eat up too much going through this, but um, the next step in our process. So let me just flip back here and we'll talk about kind of where we're at here as we push towards the end of today's stream. Let me switch my screen share. Okay, so basically we've done this part of it. Where's my cross out? Why can't I cross it out? Probably a better way to do that. So we completed the buyer's persona worksheet. We really only did it for the one persona, but we kind of talked through the basics of what would go into the buyer persona sheet for the other persona. So the final two things that I want to do, number one is I want to talk a little bit about Optimist and our positioning, and we can kind of reference or think back to the things that we just filled in about these ICPs. And basically, all we're trying to get to at this stage is like, of these two buckets of potential buyers, is there one that is sort of clearly a better focus for us? Because I think that's part of repositioning, right? Is sort of figuring that out and figuring out like who are we talking to and how sort of specific can we get about that. So let me pull up my other work here. I've got just a really simple like SWOT template. So yeah, this is one of my favorite like frameworks for kind of thinking through strategy and sort of a competitive market in particular. If you're not familiar with this, this is a simplified version, but basically the way that you think about this is like there's sort of four quadrants. So you look at we look at our business Optimist, and what we want to focus on first is like strengths. Then we want to focus on weaknesses. Then we want to focus on opportunities, and then we want to focus on our threats. So like I think strengths and weaknesses are relatively clear. Opportunities generally mean like what are sort of the most open opportunities for us as a business, and then threats are what things are sort of pose sort of a major risk to the way that we do business or our company in general. So what I want to do here is I want to sort of fill this out, think through logically, like what is Optimus really good at? What are we not great at? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? What are some of the opportunities we have in front of us? What are some of the threats to those opportunities, etc. And then from there, we can sort of again think back to the two ICPs and say, okay, based on what we're seeing, based on some of the trends, some of the goals and the challenges and things that these two ICPs are facing, who are we best positioned to serve? Who can we best help? And where are we going to create the most value as a business? And so that's really what we're trying to boil this down to. So let's just jump into it. Strengths, I think from Optimist perspective, we have world-class freelance talent on our team. One of the things about us, if you're not familiar with Optimist, we operate on kind of this hybrid model where we have, basically a collective of freelancers who kind of work together, and we kind of build like these custom teams for clients. The good news is that we have almost an infinitely scalable team, right? Meaning that we don't have an office, we don't have to worry about hiring full-time employees. We can sort of pull people into particular projects for specific clients, that kind of thing. And so we have almost an infinitely scalable team and process. Some of the other strengths here, I think operations and project management. Shout out to Katie on our team, who's sort of the head of our operations. She is an Asana master, but far beyond that, she's just has sort of a superpower for seeing the chessboard, if you will, and sort of coordinating things, building very specific custom workflows that fit and integrate into other people's existing workflows, managing, coordinating handoffs, things like that. All the like the nitty gritty, like tedious stuff that people will happily have somebody else do or pay for someone else to do. I think we create great content. It sort of goes part and parcel with the world-class freelance talent. But I think if you put us on a scale of possible quality of content, I think we can do a lot of it. there's probably more strengths here, and I don't want to seem like we only have a few strengths, but it's probably worth jumping over here to weaknesses, because obviously on the flip side of almost all of these, there is a weakness, right? So for instance, world class freelance talent is not cheap, right? So one of our weaknesses is that we are sort of a premium price point. We charge a lot more than probably a lot of companies. Well, I shouldn't say that. We charge more than the cheapest agencies for sure. I think we charge in line with many of the more premium, more like bespoke, kind of creative shops. Um, so that's definitely one of the weaknesses of ours. Uh, other weaknesses might be I would say account management. I think that's one that's like a double edged sword, uh, because of our like hybrid kind of collective thing or whatever. Right? We explicitly do not have account managers, and that's part to sort of make the business work and sort of function in the way that we envisioned it, while keeping the cost and the structure making sense. Um, the other part of it is that we explicitly did that because my experience with working in agency has always been that like account management is sort of a more of a barrier and a hurdle than a helper, but it can also be a weakness, right? Most of our team is very heads down. They're very focused on doing the work. There isn't somebody dedicated to just like sort of communicating with the client. Obviously we always try to communicate with the client as best we can, but being that it's no one's only job, that is probably a weakness of ours overall, if I were to be if I'm being honest. um World class finance talent, scalable team process operations and project management. We create good content. Hmm. What are some of our other weaknesses? I think one of our big strengths is SEO playbooks. Just historically, that's been a big focus of ours is SEO. So whether or not we want that to be the case forever, TBD. But I think for right now, that is one of the things that we're primarily known for. I think it's one of the things that we do pretty well. But on the flip side, one of the weaknesses is that we are, not, we're not technical SEO experts. We're not particularly well equipped to, do quote unquote SEO in the broadest sense for really big complex websites, for instance, right? Like if somebody came to us and they said, hey, we've got we're I don't know, Vanguard, or I don't know, whatever, Time Magazine or something, and we've got 10 billion pages on our website, and we need to figure out like how to optimize our site from a technical SEO perspective. That would probably not be a fit for us. That is not our strength. We know a lot about SEO. We do pretty good job with sort of the basic foundational technical SEO stuff and some edge cases. But yeah, we're definitely not a million page website SEO experts, and those certainly exist in the world. And that's not our forte specifically. Um, some of the other weaknesses. Shoot, I had one and I can't think what it was now. I'm sure I'll come back to it. Let's talk about opportunities and threats really quick. We'll kind of jump through these next couple boxes here. Uh, the first thing that comes to mind is the threats, right? So AI for content creation, right? I mean, I think is the existential threat for probably our entire industry, but it's worth noting, of course, the better AI is at creating content, the less valuable our skills become as primarily content creators. Um, I think the other big threat here is SEO related. I think my personal opinion is like SEO is essentially evolved. I think obviously there's still some fruit to be had from kind of traditional SEO and content as we have known it and done it for 10 or 20 years now. But I think we're seeing that rapidly transition, right? And I think SEO is both becoming more complex, and it's also changing in fundamentally changing, right? So SEO as we know it, and sort of the levers and the strategies and the tactics that have worked in traditional SERP are not, as far as we know, they're not the same tactics and strategies and levers that are going to work for, say, AI overviews or optimizing for Chat GPT or any of these other things that are now sort of in the broader circle of SEO. And so I think, again, like maybe even more broadly, I can say like the evolution of SEO is really what the threat is, in that it changes into something new that we are no longer particularly well suited to do at a high level. I think that's a very real threat for us. On the flip side, I think there's some interesting opportunities for us. So if I think about the opportunities that we have facing us, one of them is audio content, right? It's probably worth making these both their own, but we could lump them together. And video content, right? We've traditionally only done really only done written and designed content. So we've dipped our toes into some like video stuff, reels and motion graphics and some things like that over the years. But we're not sort of like a full-fledged like audio or video. So obviously from a broader perspective, right? I think that's probably a weakness, right? Is that we, only, right? We only do sort of like traditional content, if you will, right? So we really haven't branched into things like audio or video, podcasts, that kind of thing. So that could definitely be a big opportunity in the future. World-class freelance talent. I'm trying to think through some of the other things here. Feel free to chime in the chat, by the way, if you know anything about Optimist and have any thoughts on what our strengths or weaknesses are, or some of the opportunities or threats that are facing us. Also, feel free to chime in if you're starting to see any patterns here about how we align with the ICPs that we've been talking about. I know. I think one of our strengths here is that, and really, strengths are of course relative. So I would say like one of our strengths is like consistency, and I think that manifests in two different ways. One is that compared to a traditional agency where they've got either in-house team of writers, let's say, or they've got kind of a revolving cast of freelancers, we're able to be more consistent because we work with freelancers, but we sort of build these teams that generally stay static, meaning that once a writer is writing for your business, they're generally going to continue to write for that business unless something changes majorly or the client wants a different writer or something. But that there's more continuity and consistency there in general. And then on the flip side, I would say there's also sort of a consistency argument. When you think about like, let's say, hiring agency versus freelancers, right? Freelancers. No offense to all my freelance friends, but quality can be hit or miss depending on who you work with. And even sometimes working with the same freelancer, there's not always consistency. In part because there's just not like the layers of sort of quality control and stuff that go into it. So I think that's a big one that we can definitely be stand out from both other agencies and from other options like freelancers. The other flip side of that is expertise. So again, if you think about traditional agencies, a lot of them, for instance, have like in-house writers, and those are just like general writers, and they write about a million different topics, and they've written about 1,000 other topics, but they're not really like deep experts on any particular one. Our team is sort of a mix of those, I would say. We do have certainly just like some really great writers who can, flex to a lot of different topics. But we also have some like a lot of expert level writers, either on our core team or in our sort of broader universe, who have sort of a deep subject matter expertise. Maybe they used to be a software developer for 10 years and then they got into writing, and so they're sort of really focused on like developer topics or different things like that. So being able to kind of pull in that very specific expertise, and especially like at scale, I think is a particular strength that we have. I think back to weaknesses, there was another weakness that I wanted to list there and I can't think of what it was now. Premium price point, let's just call it like, no central account management. We're not technical SEO experts. We only do the writing, design, strategy. I mean, not only those three things explicitly, but we don't do audio or video content. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would add here. I think for right now, this gives me a pretty good sense. So if I think about this, and then let's flip back here. So let me flip back to a couple of our different sheets that we've got open, because I'm back up to, I don't know, 20 tabs or something here. But one of the things that strikes me here, so if we look at this buyer persona template, so again, this is sort of the mid-market content leader. So this was the first group of ICPs interviews that we went through. A couple things stand out to me. One is that this type of organization is often supporting and creating a lot of different types of content, right? So they have, for instance, if they're integrating these requests from, let's say, PR and brand and SEO, right? They need either an in-house team, freelancers, or an agency that can support, that can do all of those things. So whether it's writing press releases or writing blog posts or, writing LinkedIn copy or like whatever it is, right? There's a pretty broad range of skills and expertise that come with this. Which I think is sort of an interesting alignment with our business model, because we do have this world-class freelance talent. We do have sort of an almost infinitely scalable team and process. We've got operations, and that is like a big part of our strength. So while we have focused primarily on SEO, let's say for the last several years, the building blocks are still there to execute content for a lot of different purposes beyond SEO. The other thing to keep in mind too is that many of the folks who are on our team, again, they are full-time professional freelancers themselves. Many of them work with many other clients on many other types of projects that even if we haven't done them as Optimist, they may have years of experience, for instance, writing a press release or something that we have not really offered in the past to our clients, but we could easily someone from our team has expertise on both that subject and that format or that type of content. So I think that's an interesting, let's say, synergy, for lack of a better term there. The other, the other big thing here, I mean, I think if we look at this overall, I mean, I think a couple of big themes that stick out to me as part of the goals and the worries, right? One is consistency and quality, which we just talked about for Optimist, is I think a strength of ours, because we have sort of this hybrid model. We've got generally a static team that's going to stick with your account. We're not it's not a revolving cast of different writers and designers, for instance. That's how you get consistency, right? That's how you get a content team that knows your brand and can write content without a lot of revisions and extra rework. And so I think that plays into our strength. The other thing is, the workflow, or kind of maximizing the impact of content, repurposing, all of those things are kind of a separate bucket here, which I think also plays into our strength. As we mentioned before, I think workflows, operations, that's part of our business model that we have, done really well. We've really focused a lot on building that out. Once again, shout out to Katie uh, for leading that charge, but really getting in the weeds, developing sophisticated workflows, figuring out detailed timing uh, and like all the nuanced details of tasks and subtasks and blockers and all that stuff. I think that's a big one that helps support all of this stuff, right? So how do you effectively maximize the value of your content? A lot of that is repurposing it, repackaging it, extending its life cycle, making it work for different formats. All of those require some kind of a workflow or some kind of coordination that's happening. So I think that's another big one, another big sort of value that we can bring here. Um, I think the other, yeah, the other big thing here is that, like, I think that content teams being seen as order takers rather than strategic enablers is sort of a function of the things that we just discussed, right? Which is that A, they don't have the talent to just sort of like offload the content to someone else, and so that eats up a lot of their time. They don't have workflows or operations kind of figured out for how to execute all of these different uh, types of content, or repurposing steps and processes, things like that. Uh, so that ends up eating up a lot of their time. They are, the content quality is either not there or inconsistent, which eats up a lot of time. So I feel like, if our primary goal then is to, sort of help content teams elevate, elevate to become more strategic and rather than order takers, I think that really aligns with what we're trying to do there. Let's talk really quick about the other buyer persona, and as you probably know, we didn't translate it into our sheet quite yet, so we'll have to just kind of go through the. Actually, yeah, these are our bullet points here. Yeah, I'm a little conflicted because as I said previously, this is kind of this has always been sort of our bread and butter at Optimist is generally like a marketing leader, generally like an earlier stage or smaller size company who's trying to scale, and we've really found it. We've had a lot of success, and we've found a lot of joy, I think, in sort of being the content team who can kind of come in and like scale things up and kick things off and kind of build, in a lot of cases, building from scratch. Um, so there's definitely part of me that wants to like look at these these two ICPs and say like, okay, we can figure out how to make this work. But the reality is if we look at the common threads here for these smaller, earlier stage companies, some of the things that we talked about before. One is extremely resource constrained. Two is, because of resource constraints, tend to be, at least my interpretation, is that, a little bit bearish on making any big bets on any particular type of content or strategy or channel, which makes it hard. And the third thing, C, is, seem extremely interested in the, again, I wouldn't say the lowest cost per se, but maybe the most cost effective or most efficient route for sort of testing different channels or strategies, which, as we have seen from these interviews, and as we were going through the bullet points, right, for a lot of teams, for a lot of these folks, what that has translated into is using AI, right? Using AI to sort of create a bunch of content, throw it out there, kind of see, throw it out and see what sticks, kind of an approach, I would say. And using that as a way to kind of stay agile, stay scrappy, don't waste too many dollars on any particular on any one particular strategy, and don't make a big bet on something that could be unpredictable, which as we've sort of seen over the last few years, or over the last few years, I guess it is now. Um, it is unpredictable, right? It's certainly less predictable than it used to be. SEO is less predictable than it used to be. AI and how AI can be used or should be used is, I think, less predictable. And because of all of that, I think content marketing in general has felt less predictable for a lot of these companies, especially these early stage companies that are trying to figure out, how do we go from 0 to 1? How do we go from 1 to 100? How do we take those initial steps? I think there's just less of a clear playbook. Whereas I think the more established companies, perhaps they don't have a clear playbook per se, like they don't have one playbook, but they know that the playbook is basically to try to spin as many of these plates as possible, uh, based on the available resources. Um, so yeah, I think as I'm thinking through this, I think the main takeaway here is essentially, unless we want to become sort of a super AI content marketing shop who can do content at again, a very low unit economics, a very efficient, with very efficient unit economics, let's say. Um, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how we would ever compete with using AI for content. And I guess, it's worth noting that we didn't touch on AI too much in our first sort of set of personas. But um, AI is not off the table, I think, for those larger companies, but I don't think that they're relying on AI as sort of the primary engine for content in the way that some of these early stage companies talked about. I think the difference is sort of where the AI fits in. I think folks in these companies, from my conversations, were thinking about AI as an augmentation tool, a workflow tool, or a way to sort of improve efficiency or output, or sort of uh, those types of things. Whereas I think from the conversation I had with a lot of the earlier stage companies, it was sort of the strategy. Like the strategy was, we're going to use AI to create content. Um, and like I said, I don't. That seems like a hard sell to convince them to go from ostensibly free content to paying us. And as we've already established, we are sort of a premium, higher price option even than other agencies. So uh, going from free AI content to high end content with lots of people involved, and lots of sort of strategy and thinking baked in. It's not I guess it's not really that surprising that that we haven't seen the number of great fit leads and had the same number of conversations in this space, because it just feels like there's just a misalignment there. So I think that's maybe a good place to wrap it for today. I think what we're deciding here is that we're shifting gears at Optimist. Rather than focusing on our traditional ICP, startups, and Series A, Series B, head of marketing, CMO, whatever, who's going to come in and hire us to be kind of their whole content marketing team. I think our efforts now are really about how do we help these content leaders, these heads of content, etc., who are in the weeds and who need support, but they have all of these additional like sort of problems and challenges around content creation. I think the primary uh, fulcrum here perhaps is how do we sort of fit into that team? How do we provide the right balance of like quality and cost for it to make sense for these folks and these teams? But yeah, I think that's the decision we're making today, is that this is our audience, mid-market content leaders, head of content, content director, etc., mid-sized companies, so approximately 500 to 5,000 employees, Yeah, interesting. Okay, interesting findings here. I'm excited about this because I think it is going to open up a lot of new stuff. We've obviously focused on startups for most of our existence, and so because of that, we've focused on ultra super duper growth case studies and things like that. And I think this audience, while I'm sure growth is a big part of it, you know thinking a little bit more about some of those details and like how does this stuff actually work? How does it come together? How do we go from a strategy to a plan to execution, and how do we get buy-in and do all this stuff? So maybe we're working on content that focuses on some of those those qualitative goals and the soft skills that we haven't really focused a lot on at startups. So yeah, fascinating. Anyway, all right. Well, that's where we're going to leave it, guys. Tomorrow we're going to pick things back up. Audience. So today we did the audience research segmentation. We have sort of chosen our path here, which is the mid market content leader, who we're going to be focused on for the remainder of this strategy project. Tomorrow, let me flip my screen here really quick. We're going to dig into that audience more. So part of our interviews, we learned a lot about different channels and content consumption habits, things like that from these folks that we talked to. So we'll dig into that. We'll review the channels, select some viable channels. We'll review some of the named creators. So some of the specific people these personas said explicitly they follow or read or watch. And then, we're going to kind of use the algorithm and the social channels to kind of go deeper and really catalog this stuff. Again, the framework tomorrow is channels, creators, content. So what we're going to do is kind of content competitor research, if you will, look at who else is creating content for these folks that we're targeting, figure out what kind of content they're creating that is most compelling and interesting and engaging, and then sort of glean whatever insights we can about how we should be approaching our own content to hopefully reach that same audience and influence their buying decisions, as it were. All right, y'all. Amazing first day. Thank you all for joining me today. It was really awesome seeing so many familiar names in the chat and whatnot. I hope this was valuable as a walkthrough, as kind of a live demonstration. Appreciate all your supports, and would love to see you tomorrow on our live stream. Cool. Again, thanks all, and have a great rest of your day. See you tomorrow. Cheers.